the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. I am a SAG-AFTRA member. My union says it strongly supports the rights of journalists not to be impeded in their efforts to report the news. SAG-AFTRA says journalists have an obligation to report what is happening in their community and in the world. SAG-AFTRA asks that law enforcement in Ferguson permit journalists there the freedom to do their jobs. Half the U.S. Senate wants a one-year moratorium on U.S. Postal Service plans to close mail processing plants and slow down first-class mail delivery. A letter signed by 50 U.S. senators said Congress should block the Postmaster General's proposal to close up to 82 mail processing centers, eliminating 15,000 jobs and slowing down first-class mail delivery. The 50 senators want a key committee to include a one-year ban on mail delivery cuts as part of a must-pass piece of legislation to keep the federal government running into the new fiscal year that starts October 1st. The senators say a one-year moratorium will give Congress time to enact comprehensive postal reforms to keep the Postal Service functioning well into the future. 3 airline unions are opposing a foreign air carrier permit for Norwegian Air International. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, and the Transport Workers Union want the U.S. Department of Transportation to uphold the strong labor protections outlined in the EU-U.S. Air Transport Agreement called Open Skies. The unions, representing 80,000 flight attendants, also say they have safety concerns about Thailand-based cabin crews hired through a system that they say isn't as strong on background checks as the U.S. and European systems. The unions say the permit application from Norwegian Air International undercuts labor standards through evasion of international labor laws and would create unfair competition for airlines that do operate under the Open Skies Agreement. 2,500 Penn State University workers represented by the Teamsters have overwhelmingly ratified a new contract. In a printed statement, John Light, president of Teamsters Local 8, says the new contract provides guaranteed wage increases, keeps health care coverage affordable, and provides more stability for the workers.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they're still gone. Oh, and this town is my town. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This town is my town. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here. Today on the big program, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Ferguson, which seems to be dominating every bit of airspace in the news, and most of it very negative. Most of it, as you know, I sat and I watched, and I rarely do this. I sat and I watched CNN and Fox and flip between the coverage, and it seemed odd to me that they all seem to be reading kind of from the same script, which I'm not sure if this is the Pentagon. I mean, you know, during the Bush years, I would have absolutely said that all the marching orders were coming from the administration, but this looks eerily similar. Most of what I've seen, it's the outsiders causing these problems. Throwing the outsider in there. Very, very interesting to me. I'm going to talk about that also. And I guess not surprising. I don't know why I was shocked, but evidently the head of the Republican Party in Missouri not thrilled with the idea of people holding voter registration drives. And I've been waiting for the dreaded A word. I've been waiting for the Acorn, because it's all Acorn doing this stuff, even though Acorn has been out of existence for a number of years. But I've been waiting for that. I've been waiting for the fear mongering of what the new Black Panther Party must be doing. I've been waiting for all of that. And I'm sure it's coming. But I find it interesting. The folks there in Ferguson said, hey, let's have a voter registration drive, because evidently 12% of the town bothered to vote in the last election. 12%. Staggering to me. And you wonder from a political point of view, because I believe the only answer there is a political one. At some point, you have to stop with the clashes in the streets at night. I'm all in favor of peaceful protesting. I'm all in favor of jamming up the streets. I've never been one for breaking windows or destroying people's stuff, but always been a big proponent of people in the streets. But at the end of this, it is a political solution here, which means the folks here I was shocked to learn that the mayor of this town is actually a Republican. And the Republican machine there seems to be in control, which you go, it's no wonder when 12% bother to show up and vote. 12%, just mind-blowing to me. Going to get to that. Also, some because what I've been asking the question of is what we're seeing there in Ferguson with the militarized police and all of that, when does that come back to workers? Because as I've been saying, we've been seeing the fast food workers out in the streets. We've been seeing our Walmart people. We're seeing workers across this country saying, you know what, we've been getting the screws for too long. Is this a major deterrent for them? Because if you remember, and we had talked to a number of the fast food workers who went to the McDonald's headquarters in Illinois, and the overwhelming militarized police presence that was there. And to me, that kind of confrontational situation is disturbing, because what the message that it sends me, and the message that I think it sends a lot of people when you look at all of this militarization, is which side are these cops on? Supposedly, they're neutral, protect, serve, community-based policing. But what I see is very, and maybe I'm missing something, but very one-sided, very confrontational. Not about keeping people safe, not about keeping a community safe, but controlling. So it'll be interesting to see what this comes out of, and where things go in the coming weeks and months. Last night we talked about the prosecutor in the case. Bob Ney came on the program, said there's a push to get him out the door to recuse himself, this McCullough, to recuse himself from this, since he has overwhelming, just enormous ties to the police department. The father killed by a black man when he was a young child, has brothers, a mother, who've served in the police force. Should this guy step aside? And the other question is, should the feds just take over? Should this be one of those situations where locally there's not going to be any hope, and maybe they need to take over? I'm not sure. I'm of the mindset it's time to take over. I can't believe the guy has not recused himself at this point. So, interesting stuff to talk about. Also, some labor stories. Yesterday, you had folks in the Cranberry Township area, Daryl Metcalf's neck of the woods, out on an informational picket, talking about working conditions and the great work that SEIU members are doing at UPMC's Sherwood Oaks retirement facility. One of the better in the state, raving reviews of the dedicated workers. I mean, to me, it's a big part of it. We'll talk to one of the folks who was out in the street yesterday. Also, workers being locked out in Metropolis, Illinois. Deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. We'll talk about that. Also, Larry Hanley, president of ATU, is going to be here to talk about a recent victory in New York City. And, about a year and a half ago, I think it was, we talked about New York. Bloomberg had gone after the school bus drivers and basically wanted to privatize and do a whole bunch of really crazy stuff. Mayor de Blasio comes in. Different day. To me, this is another example of why you vote for worker-friendly people, and we'll talk about that. Also, your thoughts, your questions, your comments. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. So yesterday's big story of the evening outside of Ferguson was the mugshot. Yeah, the mugshot. Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, hit the Travis County Courthouse where he was booked, fingerprinted, and mugshot. And you got to give him credit. Following the Tom DeLay playbook, walked in with a big cheesy smile, grin on his face, and head held high as he told his supporters. He said, "I'm here today because I believe in the rule of law. I'm here today because I did the right thing. I'm going to enter this courthouse with my head held high, knowing that my actions, the actions I took, were not only lawful and legal, but right." Did this district attorney, did this guy give him a huge political victory and making Perry look like the underdog, making Perry look like he's being victimized? I look at this and go, I'm not sure I would have gone after him for this. Now, what they're saying is, evidently, the district attorney, the whole thing stems from Perry's threat last year to use a veto of funding for a public corruption unit that evidently was supposedly going to be looking into Perry. Now, this public corruption unit, the public integrity unit, was going to be overseen by the Democratic county district attorney, this Rosemary Lemberg, who evidently was part of a pretty hysterical DUI video and resisting arrest and all that stuff. Now, evidently, this group, Texans for Public Justice, filed a complaint against Perry for the threat of vetoing and the ultimate veto of this money, saying he was outside the bounds of his power to try and force this woman up, because he was saying, "I'm going to veto it unless you leave. You have to go." This woman district attorney, and then I'll fund it. Now they're saying that coercion is illegal, and that the veto threat for this public integrity unit evidently was supposed to be looking into this Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, something that Perry was all behind and fought for. So it'll be interesting to see what the evidence is. This close to an election seems, even if it is completely on the up and up, and I have no reason to doubt that it isn't, but even this seems to me to be a political hand. Here you go. Here's something to rally your base and to make boatloads of cash over. So it will be very interesting to see where this takes us. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about voting. I'm going to talk about voter registration in that in that Ferguson area, and it's disgusting, according to the chairman of the Republican Party there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Red roses too. I see them blue for me and you, and I say to myself, oh, wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
It's time for the world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Today is National Aviation Day, but it's a largely somber anniversary. We begin in the United States, where the Federal Aviation Administration said yesterday that they're extending a 3,000-foot no-fly zone around the town of Ferguson, Missouri. It's a decision that's kept news helicopters from doing their work.
There's nothing unsafe about a media helicopter, and in fact, it should help improve accountability.
Greg Leslie is the legal defense director at the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, and he says extending the ban for another week is a cynical move.
When you see something done that broadly, the more suspicious it is. If there was a particular protest going on, there was a legitimate reason that they needed to have open airspace, that can be an immediate order for a limited time.
According to another FAA decree issued last night, all of Syria's airspace is now off limits to American aircraft. The FAA cited the presence of anti-aircraft weapons among the extremist groups in the country as the primary reason for the flight ban. Speaking of threats to safe travel, when a volcano in Iceland erupted in 2010, ash spread over much of Europe, grounding flights across the continent for more than 6 days. And now there's concern another volcanic event could be imminent, this time at the Bardarbunga volcano. So if you're planning on a transatlantic flight in the near future, watch the forecast. And commercial air travel between Ebola-affected countries in West Africa is suspended indefinitely. A petition created by Air France flight staff is calling for their airline to do the same and stop its service to Guinea and Sierra Leone until the disease can be contained. The petition has received over 700 signatures, but so far Air France doesn't show signs of reconsidering its decision. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. In response to the shooting death of an unarmed black teen by a white police officer in Missouri, right-wing media figures have been taking crime statistics out of context to deflect focus to the supposed prevalence of black-on-black violence in America. On Fox News' America's Newsroom, co-host Martha McCollum questioned President Obama's condolences and the statement about the death of Michael Brown, asking,
what about these children who are being killed in the streets in Chicago? What about black-on-black violence?
On his radio show, host Rush Limbaugh also criticized the coverage of Ferguson by bringing up black-on-black violence in places like Chicago.
How many murders are there every week in Chicago? And there doesn't seem to be any outrage about it. Granted, most of the murders in Chicago are not mixed-race circumstances.
The missing context, as Jamel Bowie noted in the Daily Beast, is that, quote, there's no such thing as black-on-black crime, explaining, quote, for the large majority of crimes, you'll find that victims and offenders share a racial identity. For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
The billionaires don't want you to vote this year. We'll send you a message that's loud and clear that the votes can't be counted in your community. Why even register? Don't waste your energy.
Now why bother? Why bother registering? And why bother holding registration drives? Something that caught my attention today. And it's one of these things that you go, really, did Republicans actually say this? Or I should say, did the executive director of the Missouri Republican Party actually say this? He was asked about what's a voter registration drive going on in Ferguson, Missouri, as the protests, as the people are in the streets voicing their displeasure. There are folks saying, hey, the way we should be moving is a political direction. Register to vote. But Mr. Head of the Missouri Republican Party says, if that's not fanning the political flames, I don't know what is. He says, I think it's not only disgusting, but completely inappropriate. Really? Here to talk a little bit about the comment, our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson. Erwin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So, disgusting, inappropriate. I don't know that those are words that I would use to citizens trying to register other citizens to vote.
I'll tell you, when I saw this article and then I heard about it on a television broadcast on MSNBC, the Rachel Maddow show, for once, I was all but speechless, thunderstruck. I mean, I never thought of voter registration activities as being a liberal or a conservative kind of activity, as a Democratic or Republican, as kind of activity, as a union versus management kind of activity, as a black versus white kind of activity. It seems to me that voter registration is a core American value. Actually, in my world, growing up, and indeed with all humility as a part of the fabric of my work and my career, voter registration has always been a measure of patriotism, of loyalty. In addition to being a logical and understandable kind of expression of peaceful, non-violent means of participating in an effort to protect and secure and advance the rights of people in this country, something that sets us all apart from the other countries of the world, that sets us off from the dictatorships and the oligarchies and the monarchies and the sheikdoms and who knows what. It has been the thread that has bound this nation together as a country since 1776, and certainly since 1787 with the passage of our current Constitution. So I'm thunderstruck that any political official, someone who is apparently an officer of the Republican State Committee in the state of Missouri, that of course is involved in the business of getting people elected, would find the idea that in the face of protests that have sadly at times grown violent out of people's frustration, that encouraging people to engage in a citizenship right, a citizenship obligation, a basic duty in civics was, using his word, disgusting. I think his characterization is disgusting and much worse.
I'm right there with you. The reason I opened up with the clip that I did, Paul Weyrich, the founder of the Heritage co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, and many of the right-wing groups that are pushing this voter suppression of the voter ID and all of these things that we've seen across the country. And that clip was from 1980. This has been a movement of the right, and especially these type of conservatives, for many, many years. So I got to be honest, I'm not surprised by this kind of thinking from these folks.
Well, I suspect that I'm not surprised either, but I am repulsed. This is just unacceptable. The notion is, and people need to know and understand the development of communities in the area around St. Louis. Historically, the city of St. Louis made a decision, a political decision decades ago, to not incorporate these perimeter communities around St. Louis. And that was for a series of then valuable, I guess, to someone, political reasons. So this whole North County area, in which several communities, including the one where this young man was murdered by the police, is included, are very interesting in how they have developed from a community development standard and model. And how they've developed is, as recently as 10, 12 years ago, all of those North County communities were predominantly white, and they have changed. And so now we have this community, for example, that's majority black, but the political leadership is majority white. Even the police force is majority white. And it is creating a tinderbox where there is some now serious conversation in that part of the country of several of these individual communities merging into one larger and more viable, reasonable community that can have one set of political leaders and one set of administrators and save some money, and at the same time deal with the idea that these fragmentations have the effect of disenfranchising folks who have a right to participate in their democracy that this Republican state party official in Missouri finds so offensive, when he should be the one that is sitting at the table encouraging people to register to vote.
Excellent point. But in looking at this, in one of the numbers that I saw, that in the last election, only about 12% of this city bothered to get out and vote, bothered to participate, and it's no wonder that the power structure is the way it is when you don't have the participation. Do you think this may be that catalyst to get people to participate? These kind of voter registration drives, this kind of activity.
Well, hopefully the people operating, living, and breathing and functioning locally will see registering to vote and participating as a viable alternative to nightly demonstrations that have sadly, in some instances, turned violent. But we need to dig deeper. When we see indications that voter turnout was only 12%, we need to, all of us, ask the question why. And one of the answers needs to be bound up in determining whether or not the local folks have a reason to believe that participating in their democracy is futile for them. And that's precisely why they may be out in the street. That's why they may be demonstrating. And peaceful protest is one of the hallmarks of this country, and violent protest is not. And when that violent protest is done in a sense of frustration or futility, or in response to provocation by local authorities who just feel that their authority is being challenged inappropriately, we need to know that because we need to deal with it. I was pleased to learn that the Attorney General of the United States was traveling out to Missouri today to get a first-hand look at what's going on, because the strange calculus of yet another murder of a young African-American man in this community by a predominantly white police force needs, once we're done with all of the shock and all of the outrage, needs to be understood, and it needs to be understood in a sociological context so that we have a sense of what's happening in our country. In the end, we all bleed red, and any child lost is a loss that is indescribable and just so far beyond unacceptable that I don't have a word for it. And we need to understand what prompted that and what is causing all that has erupted from this. It's easy to say that the news media is engaged and is prompting this. It's easy to say that people like Reverend Al Sharpton going out there are stirring the pot. But in the end, we don't motivate people to hit the streets and compromise themselves and draw away from their families for insignificant reasons. And we need to deal with that. This country is more important, and these fundamental rights are much bigger than being so dismissive. And the notion that those people who are so dismissive could assault good citizenship efforts, the best of citizenship efforts. There is nothing higher than the office of citizen in this country, and undertaking a citizenship activity like registering to vote and ultimately voting cannot ever acceptably be the subject of derision and criticism. It has to always be the subject of recognition and elevation and participation in our democracy. One of the reasons why we here in Pennsylvania, the leadership of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, the leadership of the Pennsylvania State Building Trades, the leadership of the most significant unions, hand in glove with the NAACP and the American Civil Liberties Union and voter protection projects and community organizations, fought and won the battle over voter ID in Pennsylvania, is because all of them and us recognize this most fundamental of citizenship activities and citizenship rights and citizenship engagement, and recognize it for exactly what it is. It is our alternative to civil war. It's our alternative to civil unrest. And it is our method by which we accomplish meaningful, nonviolent change. And those who would suppress or delegitimize the rights of American citizens to participate in their democracy need to be exposed for what they are and need to be appropriately condemned.
And this comment, especially in my view, right there at the very top. So as I look at this, and we go back to when we re-examine the argument that we need to have all of these roadblocks put between people and their ballot box. And yesterday I talked about a guy who had done a law professor from Loyola who had done a study and found a handful of cases in the last 14 years out of a billion or more votes, a handful of cases that maybe possibly the voter ID law would have stopped. But you think of all of the money that went into suppressing folks, and I think of all the money that the Corbett administration spent on advertising, on billboards on the side of buses. It tells me that there's a push to make sure that people, especially people of color, don't have the opportunity, and people of less means, I should put it that way, people in poverty have less opportunity to go to that ballot box and make those changes, because I see what's going on in Ferguson as something that has to be eventually hashed out at the ballot box.
Well, I don't think that there's any question but that the safest, most secure, most consistently American method of ultimately resolving and moving forward the issues at Ferguson, Missouri, is at the ballot box. But you're right. We have people in high elective office who are using our government and our government's means and capacities and power to limit, restrict rights guaranteed to citizens is just not merely unacceptable, but shocking. It is a fundamental contradiction in our value system that needs to be exposed, needs to be discussed, needs to be destroyed. Period. There's no other way for me to articulate that. I wish there were. This is not, like so many other things, a political game or a piece of political posturing. We now have high government officials, whether they are police or governors like Governor Corbett, or members of the General Assembly like House Majority Leader here in Pennsylvania, Turzai, or Speaker of the House in Washington, John Boehner. Any time a public official uses his or her public perch, taxpayer-funded perch, high public office perch, to limit, restrict, deny, eliminate, suppress the rights of the citizens to exercise their franchise, we have somebody that is really and truly, in the end, committing an unpatriotic, anti-American, may be seditious, may be treasonous act. And I don't say that lightly. Intriguingly, when I use Pennsylvania as a touchstone, the brilliance of the framers of our state's Constitution can't be overstated. When it came to the subject of voting, and unlike the United States Constitution, the Pennsylvania State Constitution has specific language about voting rights. The framers of the Constitution delegated to the General Assembly the capacity to be involved in determining the standards by which citizens will register to vote, but reserved to the Constitution and self, and therefore to the people, the capacity to regulate voting itself, the act of voting. Right. And that is not a distinction without a difference. That's very critical, because when the courts in this state reviewed our governor and Representative Terzai's effort to impose voter ID standards on all of us Pennsylvanians, the courts recognized that distinction in our Constitution and said that the General Assembly had overstepped its legislative role created by our Constitution by attempting to regulate voting and not merely being engaged in the regulation of voter registration. So these are very serious, very significant issues that people have contemplated. It's not new. This is old wine in a new bottle, whether it's a Republican Party official in Missouri complaining today that people are actually being given the opportunity to register to vote in their country, in their state, in their county, in their community as citizens, or it was somebody else in another state not all that many years ago who said that if you were black and you wanted to register to vote, you had to pass a literacy test, or you had to pay a poll tax to exercise your franchise after you were registered to vote. These are just various sides of the same sad, sad coin, and the time has long since come and gone that we as a country must find this unacceptable. So when our Supreme Court, only a few months ago, struck a portion of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1964 by saying, among other things, that the reasons behind pre-certification required in some states and some communities by the Attorney General of the United States before any changes in voting-based laws could be approved had evaporated, we are seeing in Ferguson today the folly of the Supreme Court's pronouncement on this critical, fundamental, what you've heard me say before, foundational issue must be recognized to be.
I agree. And these comments to be called out as appropriate and really pushed back on. Erwin, I appreciate the thoughts, the comments, and I appreciate your opinion. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Good to be here. See you next week.
Our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
And I used to protest too, but the powers that be are too great, so walk away from your rebel faith.
We don't want to burn coal, we don't want to breathe coal, and heck, we don't want to export it either.
Well, heck, Oregon cancels proposed coal export facility. July 2014 was the fourth hottest July on record. Fracking industry illegally using diesel, threatening water supplies. Plus,
I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
Oh, Republican politicians do accept climate change. They're just too cowardly to admit it.
Ooh, snap. All of those cowards and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
In fact, the black soot spewed by coal rollers is often referred to as Prius repellent.
Yeah, baby, Prius repellent. The only other way to keep a Prius away from you is driving over 45 miles per hour.
Oh, Prius Slam. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, just to be fair to Priuses, or Prii, we recently bought a really old Prius, 2006, drove from Phoenix to Los Angeles. It's about 6 hours. It required one single tank of gas, and I should add the Prius has just a 10-gallon tank. That's about 45 miles per gallon, and yes, we were able to drive much, much faster than 45 miles per hour. Just wanted to set the record straight there.
Okay, good.
I mean, it's no Tesla. Of course, we'd be happy to talk about Tesla if only they gave us a free one to use. But anyway, I digress. What do you have in today's Green News Report?
Well, first, it's official. July 2014 was the fourth warmest July on record globally, following the world's hottest June on record, and we're now on track for 2014 to be the third hottest year on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Wait, June was the hottest on record globally?
Yep.
July is only the fourth hottest on record globally?
Yep.
The globe is cooling. You're welcome, GOP.
Well, hardly. To top it off, the world's oceans are now at the highest temperature ever recorded and have remained there for the third straight month. But don't expect any action on climate change from Washington anytime soon.
I don't.
We've reported before on Republicans' remarkable flip-flop on climate change since the 2008 presidential campaign.
Yeah, here are some familiar Republican voices from before the 2008 presidential election.
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change.
You're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
The fact is that we have had climate change. Clearly, humans have something to do with it.
That was then. This is now. Here's House Speaker John Boehner again.
Well, listen, I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
Well, now Bloomberg News reports this week that many Republicans privately say they accept the scientific evidence of human-caused climate change and the need to act, but they are afraid to say so publicly, fearing a backlash from their extremist Tea Party base. Bloomberg interviewed dozens of current and former Republican politicians and lobbyists. They admitted off the record that Republicans won't feel free to speak about climate change until, quote, the Tea Party loses some of its power to influence elections or a severe weather event forces serious discussion of the issue.
Very, very courageous of them.
Trouble in fracking land. 2 new studies add weight to the growing scientific evidence that the controversial drilling technique of fracking is a threat to water supplies. In the first study, researchers at Stanford University found that drillers in Wyoming are fracking for oil and gas at much shallower depths than the industry claims, and that they're even drilling through underground drinking water sources. That directly contradicts industry claims that they are drilling too deep to affect underground aquifers. But wait, there's more. Watchdog group Environmental Integrity Project reviewed the industry's own data and found the fracking industry is flouting federal clean water regulations by illegally using diesel fuel in the toxic chemical fracking cocktail that they inject deep underground, finding at least 350 wells in 12 states were fracked by 33 different companies using diesel fuel without obtaining the required permits.
I thought the use of the fracking fluid was exempt from the Clean Water Act. They would still have to report if they were using diesel fluid in there?
Yes, a specific part of the law allows them to use diesel fuel if they get permission first. It's part of a growing body of evidence against the fracking industry. A recent analysis of fracking in Pennsylvania found that oil and gas drilling has harmed privately owned water supplies over 200 times in just 5 years. But there's some good news. Another proposed coal export terminal bites the dust.
If it's being burned in Asia and China, is it any less polluting to the children of China than it is to the children of America? No. I don't think so.
That was Dr. Andy Harris of Physicians for Social Responsibility at a rally last year to stop a proposed coal export terminal from being built on the Columbia River in order to ship U.S. coal to China. Oregon's Department of State Lands listened, and now they have officially denied a crucial permit for that new proposed coal export export terminal, citing the environmental impact that shipping 40 million metric tons of coal a year would have on the region's water, air, fisheries, and the people who live there. That makes 4 of 6 proposed coal export terminals that local tribal nations and grassroots groups have successfully blocked.
Who says there are not victories to be had out there?
Yep.
For much more on all of the victories you may not have heard of, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
And another one gone, and another one gone. Another one bites the dust. Hey, hate, gonna get you too. Another one bites the dust.
Your right to vote. It's one thing you never want to miss out on. This year, the law requires that every Pennsylvania voter show a photo ID at the polls. Getting your free ID is simple and easy. Contact us today.
Smiling faces sometimes pretend to be your friend. Smiling faces show no traces of the evil that lurks within. Smiling faces sometimes.
Yeah, and such smiling, happy faces. If you remember the voter suppression thing here in Pennsylvania, if you remember the buses, the sides of the buses with the smiling person showing their ID, see, I've got it. Not, and it's not even the law. That's the thing that got me. There was one point during the litigation where the judge said, stop. You have to stop. Yet our governor spent another $1 million in advertising to tell people you need to have it, even though the court said no. I find that interesting and telling, honestly and truthfully, very telling when you're talking about the top cop, the guy who was the attorney general of our Commonwealth, the head law enforcement official, if you will, still saying, you know what, I've got my view, and your money doesn't matter. I just find it interesting, and I find it interesting that all of these voices, and again, it goes back to what we talked about yesterday. Going into what people believe, because the right-wing machine has done an amazing job of convincing us that there's voter fraud everywhere, and it's those people. It's not you. No, you're good. You're okay. You're fine. It's those people over there. The ones who hold voter registration drives at protests. It's those people. You've heard that, right? It's them. And I find it just on one hand hysterical. On the other hand, very, very dangerous. Because what it does is it sends that message to people like you and me who, we don't want people cheating at the ballot boxes. We don't want there to be fraud. And oddly enough, all of the solutions that they said they're going to stop it, like these barriers between you and your ballot box, limiting the amount of time that the polls are open. In states that had early voting, like in Ohio, they've pulled back a good deal on that because we don't want working people to have access to that ballot box. In states where they had same-day registration, there was a push to try and undo that. I think in Maine they actually did. And you look at, to me, and Irwin's right, there is no higher office in this country than citizen. And that right to that absolute fundamental right to that ballot box, to me, is sacrosanct. This idea that, and it goes back to the Wayrick clip, of which I had heard, when I was in high school, the government teacher that I had in a very comical, satirical way, facetiously says, "Don't bother voting. All you 18-year-olds, don't vote. Don't do it, because it's going to make my vote stronger." That's basically what Wyrick was saying. Look, if we can hold down, same thing Corbett said in 2010, do fine if we can hold that vote down in Philadelphia. if you can suppress your enemy's votes, the other side, if you can hold them down while increasing your votes, you're going to win. And that, in this state, is the only way Republicans do win, because the voter registration is so skewed. Democrats have considerable more registered voters. The question is, and the problem is, they don't get out the vote. So that's how we have a state that, well, follows a lot of really bizarre right-wing policies. All of the Alex stuff is here. The voter suppression happened, the gerrymandering, the privatization of things. This administration, the Corbett administration, has tried very diligently. You got to give them credit. They have some state-to-itiveness, which means, you know, hey, we're gonna privatize those wine and spirit shops no matter what. No matter what. You know, originally, for those who remember, and you need to remember this stuff for Election Day, which is the reason I bring it up. Originally, the Corbett administration, Turzai, and the rest of the privatized crowd were touting $6 to $7 billion that we would get for the wine and spirit shops. We could just sell them, and people will pay hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll take in $6 to $7 billion, and it's going to be the cure-all for everything. It's going to cure all of our budget problems. And they did that hoping that we would go, oh, well, it'll fix it. Okay. Except, you know, it's like anything. When you take a look at it, you go, well, where does the money come from? Are we missing something? Because in states that have privatized their assets, they didn't get anywhere even near the ballpark of that. If there's the $6 to $7 billion ballpark over here, what you got is, you know, on the other side of town, probably on the other side of the globe. Because if you look at some of those areas, they were selling licenses for $25,000 and $30,000, as where the people here were saying we'd get millions. I don't know how you come up with that, but that's what they tried. So then they cut it down. They said, okay, well, you know, realistically, we won't get 6 to 7. We'll get like 4. And then upon further review, kind of like it's football season, got to throw in that, you know, that review talk. Upon further review, the 6 to 7 down to 4, and that didn't even fly. And then it got down to, I think it was like 1.7, and then it was 1, and then it was, you know, $750 million, and then it was, we don't know. But it's not a core function of government. And you go, whoa. March me back here. I thought we were selling this off to solve all of our problems. This was going to solve all of our funding problems. This was the end of it. We would have to do nothing else but do this. And then you bait and switch with, well, it's not really, it's not a core function of government. I argue it is. And now still pushing. Now they're trying to attach it to everything, saying, "Oh, if you want this, you want transportation, gotta have liquor." Not really understanding that. I don't know that you want roads and bridges with booze. Just a thought. I don't know that it's good messaging to put them together, and they realized that, and they walked back from it. But you stop and you think about how much time, effort, money, how much resource went into all of these schemes. How much of it? And it's well, I mean, it's scary on a number of levels of how easily they spend our money. It's scary on a number of levels that they get away with the stuff that they do. And I guess at the end, we need to be holding them accountable in November, which takes me back to what's going on in Ferguson and this voter registration drive that this guy said was, and I can't make this up, not only disgusting, but completely inappropriate. To me, the absolute appropriate response is a political response. The absolute appropriate response is us saying we've got to change these people who have made all of these bad decisions. Because nobody can look at what's going on in Ferguson, and nobody, not even my right-wing friends, can look at the leadership of that area and say they've made the right decisions. They've made the right choices. At every turn, all along the hierarchy, bad choices. The governor, I'm still trying to figure out, and look, he's a Democrat. I'm still trying to figure out what he was thinking. Personally, I don't lift the curfew. I would have kept the midnight to 5 a.m. curfew because, as my mother always said, when the street lights are on, very little good ever comes of it. And you know, like, I grew up in a high poverty area. I grew up in the projects where, when at nighttime, unfortunately, out come the cockroaches. And when that happens, you have trouble. So I'm of the mindset, and I would have had a curfew. And then, you know, slowly, I probably would have had a 10 o'clock curfew. And slowly I would have moved that back. Because you've got to get away from the passions. Have the daytime protests. I'm in favor 100%. And I know there may be some people going, but Rick, you know, you're the freedom guy. Yeah, but I also understand public safety. And it goes back to my being a kid. Honestly, nothing good happens at night. Nothing. Under the cloak of darkness, people do crazy things. And it's not just the outsiders. You know, I always loved that frame. You know, it's the outsiders who are doing this stuff. Not so much. You may have a handful, but at the end of the day, you're still talking about the communities outraged, as they should be. A young man's been murdered. And today I understand the beginning of the process to hold that person accountable. My question then becomes, if this guy is somehow, you know, and I'm not going to be obviously on the jury, but if somehow a jury of his peers finds him not guilty, we're right back in this situation, and I think worse. So it'll be interesting to see where this takes us. And, you know, oddly enough, you know, yesterday we talked with Bob Ney, who brought up the situation of this St. Louis County prosecutor, this Robert McCullough, who, you know, as Bob pointed out, his father was murdered by an African American when this guy was 12 years old. His brothers are on the police force. His mother worked in the police department in some capacity. I think unquestioningly, this guy should recuse himself. Look, even if you believe that he can be unbiased, even if you're someone who may believe that he can be impartial, the appearance to me is enough. The outward appearance of this guy, potentially every decision being viewed through the lens of, well, you know, he's on the side of the cops because his brother and his mother and his father, it's a family tradition. It's that blue wall. To me, that makes me step back. Now, I don't know if the governor can step in and say, hey, you got to go. I don't know if the Justice Department can do it. I honestly don't know. But for me, from the outside, just the appearance, to me, this is a no-brainer. I step aside. I step aside and say that, you know what, for the good of the public, for the good of public safety, I understand, and, you know, I'm not partial, but I understand the idea of it. In this kind of a case, given this kind of a situation, the heated nature of it, I see stepping back. Now, the other side of this is this guy's a good politician. He's a career guy, and they all have aspirations of the next step forward. This, in a political career, can be viewed as weakness. I fully understand that as well. So we will see what the coming weeks, the coming hours, days, weeks, and months will bring us. I'm hoping now that Holder's there will bring a bit of calm. Last night, not so much. We'll see what happens tonight, because, you know, as we said earlier, the beginning of the presentation of whatever evidence there may be to a grand jury. So we will find out more tomorrow. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. where working people come to talk.
Now my vision is no longer hazy. I'm very lucky to have my crew. Grace to find me when she flew. I've been knocked down, beat down, black and blue. She's not the one coming back for you. She's not the one coming back for you. If I fall back down, you're the one who will hang over again. If I fall back down, you're gonna be my friend.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. SAG-AFTRA, a union that represents broadcast journalists, including many local St. Louis area broadcasters, is condemning the arrests of journalists trying to cover the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. I am a SAG-AFTRA member. My union says it strongly supports the rights of journalists not to be impeded in their efforts to report the news. SAG-AFTRA says journalists have an obligation to report what is happening in their community and in the world. SAG-AFTRA asks that law enforcement in Ferguson permit journalists there the freedom to do their jobs. Half the U.S. Senate wants a one-year moratorium on U.S. Postal Service plans to close mail processing plants and slow down first-class mail delivery. A letter signed by 50 U.S. senators said Congress should block the Postmaster General's proposal to close up to 82 mail processing centers, eliminating 15,000 jobs and slowing down first-class mail delivery. The 50 senators want a key committee to include a one-year ban on mail delivery cuts as part of a must-pass piece of legislation to keep the federal government running into the new fiscal year that starts October 1st. The senators say a one-year moratorium will give Congress time to enact comprehensive postal reforms to keep the Postal Service functioning well into the future. 3 airline unions are opposing a foreign air carrier permit for Norwegian Air International. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, and the Transport Workers Union want the U.S. Department of Transportation to uphold the strong labor protections outlined in the EU-U.S. Air Transport Agreement called Open Skies. The unions, representing 80,000 flight attendants, also say they have safety concerns about Thailand-based cabin crews hired through a system that they say isn't as strong on background checks as the U.S. and European systems. The unions say the permit application from Norwegian Air International undercuts labor standards through evasion of international labor laws and would create unfair competition for airlines that do operate under the Open Skies Agreement. 2,500 Penn State University workers represented by the Teamsters have overwhelmingly ratified a new contract. In a printed statement, John Light, president of Teamsters Local 8, says the new contract provides guaranteed wage increases, keeps health care coverage affordable, and provides more stability for the workers.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
What they do, they smile in your face. All the time they want to take your place. The backstabbers, they smile in your face. All the time.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it was early August this year. That Honeywell, and you may remember Honeywell had locked out their employees a couple years back. We had talked about it here on the program extensively during the last lockout. And, to steal a phrase from Yogi Berra, it seems like deja vu all over again. The beginning of the month, evidently Honeywell walked in, slapped their proposal on the bargaining table, and basically it was take it or leave it. When the union said, well, we want to negotiate, they said, well, we're going to lock you out. And again, it seems to be back to the deja vu all over again. And during the first lockout, we used to have John Paul Smith on the program often to give us updates, which is why I have asked him back. John, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Rick.
So, this seems like it's just deja vu all over again. It seems like this is the same path that you guys followed couple of years back, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, but it's the same path, but it's a different fight. The last lockout, we became a smarter, stronger local, a little bit smaller local now, but definitely stronger and smarter. And the fight is different. Our members have been through this before, and we know how to survive, and we know how to fight. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
There's something seriously wrong with this, though, John, because you said they know how to survive. This isn't about just surviving. What does this kind of environment do to families? What does this kind of work environment do to an entire community like Metropolis, Illinois?
Well, it's devastating for the community, at least in the short term and maybe the long term. The fight we have now, the company's wanting to be able to contract most of our local workforce out for in favor of out-of-town contractors. So in the long term, it could have an effect. Short term, the workers they're busting in, they're not stopping and spending any money in Metropolis and keeping local businesses alive the same way the workers do.
I understand, and I'm not quite sure what you guys make. You're one of the only companies here, I guess the only company in the U.S. To make the product that you do. What was it again?
Right, we're the only United States conversion facility for natural uranium. We convert uranium into uranium hexafluoride UF6 for nuclear fuel.
This is really dangerous stuff, right?
Definitely dangerous stuff, and they're operating the plant with a salary workforce that has little to no experience doing so. The last lockout, many of the salary workforce did not like the way the company treated them either. Much of them have moved on. So I have a contingency workforce of brand new salary employees. So that does not make the situation any safer.
Have you had any type of releases, because this is dangerous stuff. You don't want this stuff in the air. You don't want this stuff in your water supply, right?
Right, and they actually had 2 small releases last week on Friday that the company says were minor, which I can understand why the company would want to classify them as minor, but there should never be a time when you have a release of uranium hexafluoride. And also, the company has put a lot of things out to the media, but they chose to keep that quiet.
Now, I would assume that you'd want to hold that close to your vest. You don't really want the community to know what they may be breathing or consuming or what their kids may be playing in.
No, and the company wanted to make accusations that the union was blowing the release is out of proportion. But the union actually purposely, we never put anything out on the company's response to releases because, quite honestly, we don't know. We're not in there with them. We only recognize that for all the things the company wanted to put out to the public, it was pretty ironic they wanted to keep that quiet.
Yeah. And the thing that gets me, John, is what you're talking about is a job that has got to have a very high level of skill. I mean, with the high level of risk, you've got to be talking about people who have a high consciousness for safety, a high level of skills, so that you don't just I hit the wrong button and everything goes haywire. I don't know that I would, if I lived in that community, I'd feel comfortable with new salaried type employees who don't really know the job, or transients coming in who go, well, I'm leaving anyway. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable with that.
Well, and that's part of our mission is to make sure we educate the public. Like many communities, a lot of people, even in the Metropolis area, don't understand what we do at the plant, and that probably is true for a lot of cities across the country. A lot of people probably don't actually know the chemicals that are in their backyard.
Right.
So part of our goal is to try to educate the public on what's going on there and why it's important to have an experienced workforce doing that work.
I look in Texas, where when we did our People's Tour for America, our cross-country labor history tour last summer, we ended up in West Texas, where the fertilizer plant exploded, killing a number of workers and first responders, and left a crater in the earth 93 feet around 10 feet deep. And the Texas lieutenant governor, I think it was, said that if you want to know what's in the plants in your community, just go up and knock on the door and ask them. So let me ask you this. If I live in Metropolis, Illinois, do you think I can go up to Honeywell's door and knock on the door and say, hey, Mr. Plant Manager, I want to know what it is what you've got here?
I'd probably tell you good luck. You wouldn't be able to drive your car to the front door. Security would stop you before you ever got in there. So The only people that are very well educated in a community on what we do there are people that have done quite a bit of independent research. The company will say, hey, we convert uranium at this plant, but they don't tell you about the massive amounts of hydrofluoric acid they have there, sulfuric acid, or things of that nature that, quite frankly, are probably more dangerous than the uranium itself.
So this, as I understand it, and help me if I'm wrong, this lockout, this is not of the workers doing. This is the company saying, you take what we're going to give, or you go to the curb. Am I getting this right?
That's exactly what happened. On the contract expiration leading toward midnight of August 1st, we weren't at an agreement, weren't even close to an agreement because the company had a kind of take it or leave it attitude in negotiations the entire time. And leading up to the end of the expiration there, we told the company, look, we're willing to continue to operate the plant until we reach an agreement. We never mentioned the strike. We never told our members, the community, anyone we intended to strike because we did not intend to strike. The company had the option to let us continue to operate the plant while we worked on an agreement, but they chose to go ahead and lock us out.
So given that fact right there that you laid out, could you make the argument, or maybe I could make the argument, that this wasn't really about negotiating in good faith? It was about doing away with the union workforce?
That's definitely what it's about. And this company is very good at legally, by the letter of the law, negotiating in good faith. So in terms that you or I or any person with a little common sense would think about good faith, they're definitely far from that.
So basically arguing over which I gets dotted and which T gets crossed.
Sure, or they'll come in and make a one-word change. And a one-word change is a change to the contract to let them continue to bargain in good faith, but that's not an actual change that means anything to you or I, to anyone else working anywhere.
So let's go back to the last time you guys were locked out, because again, as I said at the beginning, this is like deja vu all over again. How long were you guys locked out the last time?
Locked out 14 months, 2010 into 2011. We came back to work after that. 9 months later, we had a mass layoff after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. They did some seismic upgrades to the plant, laid off the entire bargaining unit for about a year. And so about mid-2013, April, May, we returned to the plant, got the plant back going again for Honeywell. Our operators did an excellent job of getting the plant back up to production really quickly, kind of like riding a bike. And then, fast forward about, what's that make us, about 14, 15 months later, locked out again.
And again, it just seems like another one of the same playbook over and over again. Honeywell, as I understand it, is a very profitable company. In fact, their CEO, makes in the tens of millions of dollars a year range. So this isn't a company that's hurting, are they?
No, the company is very profitable. CEO and executive compensation goes up every year, and it's a continued effort to take from the workers. But even with that, this lockout, this struggle has not been about money. This lockout has been about our job security, and that's what's been first and foremost. Also tied to that is they want to give us some substandard health care, and I don't mean health care that's a little worse than what we had. They want us to pay for our own health care. So that's really not a health care policy at all, and puts a lot more stress on workers that are working with what is known cancer-causing uranium every day.
And that's the other part of this, man. I look at taking a job like the job that you do and your fellow members do, and I can't imagine wanting to do it, but especially under these conditions, how do you keep people motivated?
Well, this is our community, and Honeywell owns the plant, but at the same time, this is the workers' plant. I mean, we've had a presence. The union's had a presence at this plant since 1959. And so, when it comes down to it, managers are from other places in the world, companies from other places in the world, but, our workers have been there for over, half a century.
Anything we can do to help? Any pressure to come to bear? Anything folks can do?
Sure. You can go to our website, USW7-669.com. There's a link right on the top of the page to sign a petition, an online petition. That's going to go to both state, federal regulators, and to company management.
And we'll make sure we get a link at thericksmithshow.com so folks can click on that link and take some action. John, I wish you nothing but the best. I hope negotiations continue. I do understand they're ongoing, and I'm hoping this is very short.
I'm hoping so as well. I'm going to get back in here and try to get some bargaining done. We're ready to negotiate an agreement, but the company's going to have to do the same.
John Paul Smith, I appreciate you taking time for us, and like I said, best of luck.
Oh, thank you.
Again, this is one of those things where, you go to the website, usw7-669.com, and follow the action link. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on John Paul Smith's name. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's time for the world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Today is National Aviation Day, but it's a largely somber anniversary. We begin in the United States, where the Federal Aviation Administration said yesterday that they're extending a 3,000-foot no-fly zone around the town of Ferguson, Missouri. It's a decision that's kept news helicopters from doing their work.
There's nothing unsafe about a media helicopter, and in fact, it should help improve accountability.
Greg Leslie is the legal defense director at the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, and he says extending the ban for another week is a cynical move.
When you see something done that broadly, the more suspicious it is. If there was a particular protest going on, there was a legitimate reason that they needed to have open airspace, that can be an immediate order for a limited time.
According to another FAA decree issued last night, all of Syria's airspace is now off limits to American aircraft. The FAA cited the presence of anti-aircraft weapons among the extremist groups in the country as the primary reason for the flight ban. Speaking of threats to safe travel, when a volcano in Iceland erupted in 2010, ash spread over much of Europe, grounding flights across the continent for more than 6 days. And now there's concern another volcanic event could be imminent, this time at the Bardarbunga volcano. So if you're planning on a transatlantic flight in the near future, watch the forecast. And commercial air travel between Ebola-affected countries in West Africa is suspended indefinitely. A petition created by Air France flight staff is calling for their airline to do the same and stop its service to Guinea and Sierra Leone until the disease can be contained. The petition has received over 700 signatures, but so far Air France doesn't show signs of reconsidering its decision. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the immigration case taken on by lawyer Leon Wiles in 1972 to save a couple from being deported. With a husband required to be deported because of a criminal conviction and a wife who was in a custody battle over her daughter that allegedly had been kidnapped by a former spouse, Attorney Wiles had his work cut out for him. Wiles would have to be persistent and especially creative to get around the deportation for the criminal conviction. His first shot was to contest the definition of cannabis, or more specifically, in this case, cannabis resin. The court apparently did not go along with Wiles' argument about said definition, but Wiles wasn't finished. He came up with another brilliant plan. So join us again next time for Wiles' other argument that would end up establishing a legal doctrine in immigration law that is still with us today. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you live and give again. It's times like these you learn to love again. It's times like these, time and time again.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. You know, this whole lockout thing, and, you know, we see this often. We see a lot of this. In fact, when we were in Philadelphia last Friday, as we were covering the Teamsters National Black Caucus Convention, there were actually several hundred people. In fact, I tweeted out pictures of the march and put it on Facebook and all that stuff. I know several hundred people out in the streets demanding that the Pennsylvania Convention Center there in Philadelphia, that, you know, about $1.5 billion of tax dollars went in to build, that they end the lockout of their workers. And it's interesting that that's the tool that these big companies and these union busting outfits want to and are employing. You know, you see the messaging. They're always on strike. There haven't been but a handful of strikes over the last couple of decades. The idea that workers go on strike in this day and age is almost non-existent, because what happens, and this is, again, I go back to why I voted for Bill Clinton. I wanted Clinton to pass a strike replacement bill, and they were one Senate vote away, thanks to Bob Dole. Bob Dole filibustered the strike replacement bill, and then it was never brought up again. And to me, it's like all of labor management has been turned upside down, and the power has completely been given to employers. And I make a distinction. You know, you look at the National Labor Relations Act that was originally passed, and I've read it. There is not one right in the original act that's given to employers. Nothing. There's none of this right to work nonsense. There's none of this there's none of this, you know, the language that, you know, that in bargaining and there's none of this stuff, that the union busting tactics that they use. This was all part of Taft-Hartley, Landrum Griffith, all of these incremental destructions of that right that was given to workers. And this has happened slowly over the years, that these rights, this very small amount of rights that workers had, have been slowly pulled back on, to where now, you know, you go on strike, it's almost a death warrant. Because what they do is they just permanently replace you, call it an economic strike, and replace everybody, and then bust the union. That's what they've gotten away with. And to me, that's ridiculous. It's wrong. It's the wrong intent of the law. It's the wrong vision of the vision of the law was to give workers a little bit of a boost, a little bit of rights, because they understood employers had all the rights. Employers set the hours, they set the wages, they set the conditions, they set all of it. Once you walk across that threshold, you're basically their property. You're a tool. And we've been really, and look, corporate America has done a great job of saying, well, we value you, and our human resources are so important. And you see the trucks running down the road with the big arrow along the trailer that says our most valuable asset pointing towards the cab, and you go, really? Do you believe that? And the answer is no, they don't believe it. They want us to believe it. And I look at companies like Honeywell, who, again, a very profitable company, paying a CEO an enormous salary, saying, you do what we tell you unquestioningly, or we're going to kick you to the curb. And we have a legal structure, a law, basically, that says they can do it. And there's virtually nothing available to change that. Now, these folks at Honeywell, look, I give them credit. I don't know how you continue. They went through a 14-month lockout, and if you remember, you know, for about a year, we had them on fairly regularly, talking about, you know, all of the things that were going on, all of the struggles. The community was struggling. There were numerous releases. There were numerous incidents. One time, I remember there being an explosion that the company covered up. This is dangerous stuff. And now here we are back again in the exact same place. And there's got to be some labor law reform, which is why I go back to the Employee Free Choice Act. That was a compromise bill. That was watered down to the point of, hey, maybe George Bush will sign this. This was not a wish list of workers and their representatives. This was maybe this is the barest minimum we could get. The idea that if workers sign cards that they begin bargaining, that it's their intent to join a union, and the company and the workers can work together to come out with a contract. And if they don't, there's a time frame that says, okay, well, if you don't get it done in this amount of time, we'll have an arbitrator sit down with both sides and they will decide a contract. Seemed pretty rational to me. And then, of course, for unfair labor practices, there were some teeth put into the law that if you fire somebody unjustly, if you fire someone illegally, there are some teeth there. Seemed rational to me. Hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, I'm probably the only guy who still talks about it because I remember our president running around going, well, we're going to pass that. It didn't happen. Never happened. And I don't even remember it coming up for a vote or a discussion, not even a vote. I should stop with the vote. Heaven for boy, hey. Talk about just a discussion of it. And working people should be clamoring for this power, this ability to take back some control, this ability to sit down and say, you know what, we want to negotiate for better wages, hours, conditions, and oh, by the way, maybe job security. That we should have the right to work, that our jobs should be ours and not just yanked away from us willy-nilly anytime an employer feels like it. To me, that seems rational. Putting in due process, if I can't go to jail and lose my livelihood without due process, how can I be fired from my job and basically end up, well, losing my economic liberty without due process? To me, that just seems logical. Look, if you're a slug, you're a slug. If you've done something wrong, there's due process. There's a path that everyone follows. To me, it's the same thing. And I look at Philly with the convention center, and I got to be honest, the workers in Philadelphia actually have a bargaining chip because you've got the Democratic National Convention Committee who came through Philly while we were there last week, saying, oh, well, let's come to Philadelphia with the convention center and all this stuff and the Rocky Museum and all of that. Problem is, you've got this lockout going on. So maybe there's some hope there. But for the rest of workers across this country, not so much. And to me, this is another reason why we need major comprehensive labor law reform. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
We don't want to burn coal, we don't want to breathe coal, and heck, we don't want to export it either.
Well, heck, Oregon cancels proposed coal export facility. July 2014 was the fourth hottest July on record. Fracking industry illegally using diesel, threatening water supplies. Plus,
I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
oh, Republican politicians do accept climate change. They're just too cowardly to admit it.
Ooh, snap. All of those cowards and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
In fact, the black soot spewed by coal rollers is often referred to as Prius repellent.
Yeah, baby, Prius repellent. The only other way to keep a Prius away from you is driving over 45 miles per hour.
Oh, Prius Slam. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, just to be fair to Priuses or Prii, we recently bought a really old Prius, 2006, drove from Phoenix to Los Angeles. It's about 6 hours. It required one single tank of gas, and I should add the Prius has just a 10-gallon tank. That's about 45 miles per gallon, and yes, we were able to drive much, much faster than 45 miles per hour. Just wanted to set the record straight there.
Okay, good.
I mean, it's no Tesla. Of course, we'd be happy to talk about Tesla if only they gave us a free one to use. But anyway, I digress. What do you have in today's Green News Report?
Well, first, it's official. July 2014 was the fourth warmest July on record globally, following the world's hottest June on record, and we're now on track for 2014 to be the third hottest year on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Wait, June was the hottest on record globally?
Yep.
July is only the fourth hottest on record globally?
Yep.
The globe is cooling. You're welcome, GOP.
Well, hardly. To top it off, the world's oceans are now at the highest temperature ever recorded and have remained there for the third straight month. But don't expect any action on climate change from Washington anytime soon.
I don't.
We've reported before on Republicans' remarkable flip-flop on climate change since the 2008 presidential campaign.
Yeah, here are some familiar Republican voices from before the 2008 presidential election.
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change.
You're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
The fact is that we have had climate change. Clearly, humans have something to do with it.
That was then. This is now. Here's House Speaker John Boehner again.
Well, listen, I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
Well, now Bloomberg News reports this week that many Republicans privately say they accept the scientific evidence of human-caused climate change and the need to act, but they are afraid to say so publicly, fearing a backlash from their extremist Tea Party base. Bloomberg interviewed dozens of current and former Republican politicians and lobbyists. They admitted off the record that Republicans won't feel free to speak about climate change until, quote, the Tea Party loses some of its power to influence elections or a severe weather event forces serious discussion of the issue.
Very, very courageous of them.
Trouble in fracking land. 2 new studies add weight to the growing scientific evidence that the controversial drilling technique of fracking is a threat to water supplies. In the first study, researchers at Stanford University found that drillers in Wyoming are fracking for oil and gas at much shallower depths than the industry claims, and that they're even drilling through underground drinking water sources. That directly contradicts industry claims that they are drilling too deep to affect underground aquifers. But wait, there's more. Watchdog group Environmental Integrity Project reviewed the industry's own data and found the fracking industry is flouting federal clean water regulations by illegally using diesel fuel in the toxic chemical fracking cocktail that they inject deep underground, finding at least 350 wells in 12 states were fracked by 33 different companies using diesel fuel without obtaining the required permits.
I thought the use of the fracking fluid was exempt from the Clean Water Act. They would still have to report if they were using diesel fluid in there?
Yes, a specific part of the law allows them to use diesel fuel if they get permission first. It's part of a growing body of evidence against the fracking industry. A recent analysis of fracking in Pennsylvania found that oil and gas drilling has harmed privately owned water supplies over 200 times in just 5 years. But there's some good news. Another proposed coal export terminal bites the dust.
If it's being burned in Asia and China, is it any less polluting to the children of China than it is to the children of America? No. I don't think so.
That was Dr. Andy Harris of Physicians for Social Responsibility at a rally last year to stop a proposed coal export terminal from being built on the Columbia River in order to ship U.S. coal to China. Oregon's Department of State Lands listened, and now they have officially denied a crucial permit for that new proposed coal export terminal, citing the environmental impact that shipping 40 million metric tons of coal a year would have on the region's water, air, fisheries, and the people who live there. That makes 4 of 6 proposed coal export terminals that local tribal nations and grassroots groups have successfully blocked.
Who says there are not victories to be had out there?
Yep.
For much more on all of the victories you may not have heard of, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
And another one gone, and another one gone. Another one bites the dust. Hey, hey, gonna get you too. Another one bites the dust.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone in a time of need.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So yesterday, out in Cranberry Township, yes, the land of Mad Cow, the land of Daryl Metcalf, and I'm hoping at some point the folks of Cranberry Township give Metcalf the boot and find some measure of sanity in a representative. Just my personal thought. But yesterday, the workers at UPMC's Sherwood Oaks premier senior living facility took to an informational picket line, to inform people passing by, residents, anybody who would listen, about the high quality care that they give and the conditions, what's going on, and also the contract negotiations that I don't know if are even ongoing since the contract expired at the end of last month. This is kind of the opening salvo of what appears to be another one of these massive corporations putting their thumbs on the back of workers, which is why I've asked Shelley Rome. She is a CNA at UPMC Sherwood Oaks Premium Senior Living Facility. She was out on the informational picket line yesterday. Shelley, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So, a Premium Senior Living Facility, is that like a nursing home?
Yeah, it's a skilled unit, but they also have personal care, and they have single units that people buy into, very expensive.
So I assume that you're talking about this premier living facility because the work that you guys do is that good, and I understand that you guys, the workers in this facility, have been recognized for the work that you guys do by the state.
We're awesome. We've had, for the past 2 years, we've had perfect state inspections.
That is awesome.
It is awesome. I have to say that all of the employees there are very good, and we work very hard. We keep our residents very happy there. They're all very affluent. They enjoyed $1.3 million in profits last year.
Wow.
Over the last 3 years.
So let me ask you this then. I mean, giving that glowing recommendation by the state, 2 perfect inspections, the fact that you guys give the best, why is UPMC doing this? And I don't know that you know the answer to this, but why? I mean, it makes no sense to me why you'd screw up something that obviously is working.
I'm really not sure. I do know that 45% of the union employees there make under $10 an hour.
Really?
Why UPMC, a Goliath like they are, is doing this to the Sherwood Oaks employees, I'm not sure.
Well, I would guess that you've got 26 executives with UPMC I know who make well over $1 million. Someone's got to feed that salary, Shelley.
Right. Well, the CEO, Jeffrey Romoff, made $6.5 million last year. So, that's apparently where the money's going instead of into the facilities that UPMC actually owns and into the employees. There's a lot of employees that are living on poverty wages. They're living paycheck to paycheck.
And what's frustrating to me, Shelley, is, I look at folks like you, the CNAs and the people who are actually taking care of our grandparents' generation. And to me, when I hear that almost half, you said 45% of the people there make less than $10 an hour, I'm going to explain to me how it is that the priority we've put on our most vulnerable, our grandparents, we're entrusting in the hands of people who, I don't know, on $10 an hour, I don't know how you take care of yourself.
Yeah, I can't explain that. These people built America for us. And the people that you can get for under that, luckily we have some awesome employees. But nobody can sustain a family on the amount of money that they're making, that they're bringing in.
Yeah, the reason people organize wages, hours, conditions, the reason people fight in the workplace for those things is because, they're struggling at home. And, you look at the care that you're giving to these people, and God bless you for doing it. But, you look at, I was reading something about the health care. They want to do something with your health care. You're taking care of other people. You can't even, with the health care that they give you, you can't take care of your own family.
Right. We have one lady who was off for a few days last month, and because she was off for those days, she didn't get paid for those days. She had health care issues. She has UPMC insurance through our employer. She went to the doctors. She's now in the hole $100 for the month because she didn't get paid, and she has so many co-payments.
That to me is obscene. That you work for a hospital chain, that you work for one of the biggest in the state, if not the biggest, and they don't even cover their own employees at a substantive level. To me, that's outrageous.
It's really a shame. But luckily, there are a lot of us employees there that do care, that have stuck it out.
What kind of turnover rate? What kind of turnover rate do you have at the facility? Because, in order to have, in my view, 2 consecutive years of state coming perfect inspections, you've got to talk about a workforce that's fairly consistent, one that's stable. I don't know that kind of stability comes with poor wages, though.
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. Our turnover rate is very high. Right now, our 3 to 11 shift and our 11 to 7 shift are running at minimal staffing. A lot of times we have 2 pages of overtime sign-up sheets for other shifts to carry over for those shifts, because we hire people, we train them, we get them their CNA license, train them on the floor, and then they leave because they can go up the road and make $13.75 an hour. And I mean, our wages are basically $3 under the state minimum, the average of a CNA job throughout Pennsylvania.
So this is why you were out yesterday on this informational picket to kind of explain to the community what's going on. And I would argue explaining to the residents what's going on, because as you pointed out, these are fairly affluent folks who are paying a big sum to this company that, as you pointed out, they made $1.3 million in pure profit over the last 3 years, and, as I understand, paid UPMC $4.4 million in related party transactions, which we're talking, almost $6 million.
Correct. And they just, in a few months ago, they just saw an increase of 6% in their fees to live there. And they were asked to contribute $80,000 towards a new gym facility, yet they won't pay their employees enough to take care of the people that live there.
That seems twisted to me. But the sad thing, Shelley, is that, when I look at all of these situations, and we've talked on this program a number of times to folks like you at other facilities who this just seems to be the modus operandi. This is UPMC's MO. And I guess the only thing I can come up with, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this is just a way of squeezing the workers, squeezing as much out of them before they discard them so that there's more profits for the top.
Correct. That's all they're out for. They're definitely out for the money because they're not out for the residents. We are. We care a lot about the residents. We want to see things improve. If we get higher wages, if we get higher wages for people to be hired in, we're going to be able to retain a better workforce, and we're going to be able to give even better care.
Yeah, I look at this, and from if I'm UPMC and I'm thinking about this, well, you know what? I can squeeze these people, and they're still going to get those perfect ratings because they care about their patients. Why not? Good, right. Sound American business model.
Definitely.
But to me, this isn't about business, Shelley. This is about my grandparents. This is about the most vulnerable in our society. And I guess part of me goes, what does it say about us? When our priorities are skewed, as we've been seeing. I mean, I can't imagine. I remember my mother worked in a nursing home for years when I was a kid, and they weren't high-paying jobs then either. And I remember the dedication and the caring of my mother and the others. And I just I guess I have a soft spot in my heart for people who take care of our most vulnerable. So I give you credit for that. But I guess as a society, I guess we just don't value them, do we?
Unfortunately not. I mean, they are what build America. They're the people that brought us up. They're the people that gave us life. We have to take care of them.
So yesterday, while you're out on this informational picket, what kind of response did you get from folks that you encountered? What kind of response did you get as you spoke with people on the street?
We got a really good response. I'd like to say a lot of middle-aged females out there were really supporting us. I was really proud of seeing that. A lot of questions, what's going on. A lot of people didn't even know Sherwood Oaks was UPMC because it's not on the sign. I mean, UPMC only steps up whenever they want the money.
Right.
Otherwise, it's Sherwood Oaks.
Do you find it interesting that, and I guess I find it interesting that middle-aged women were the most receptive, but I guess they're the ones who the caretaking, the caregiving falls onto when their parents get into their senior years and their final years. So I guess that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And they're the folks who probably are working at facilities like yours. Any negative responses from people?
Not really. Not really. Quite a few of the residents that saw us out there, they were asking questions today. Luckily, they do love us, so I think quite a few of them are on our side. I know they don't want to see prices go up, which they shouldn't. UPMC definitely has enough money. They're collecting enough money from Sherwood Oaks that there should be no problem giving us a little bit more money.
Yeah, it sounds like they're squeezing from both ends. The people who need the care and the people who are giving the care, all for their UPMC's gain.
Yeah, definitely.
So
definitely.
any negotiations going on now? As I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, your contract ended at the end of July?
Correct. And we did ask to have some more talk. Hopefully this coming week. We haven't had a response yet from UPMC.
I remember the last time this seems to follow a pattern because it sounds a lot like what happened at the Altoona facilities that UPMC owns. That they actually at one point even locked out their nurses and CNAs for several days when they did an informational strike. Does it look like this is the pattern that this company's pursuing?
I hope that we can break that pattern. I hope that we can get back into talks and everything goes well.
Right.
But you never know.
Yeah.
They have a massive amount of lawyers, a great law department, so you never know.
Yeah, we have created with our tax dollars a massive behemoth, and this is a company that was constructed with our tax dollars and benefits greatly from a nonprofit status, as I understand.
Right. UPMC is a charity, and the executives make millions while we make poverty wages.
How can we help? What can our listeners do? What can folks do to help you along?
Contact your legislatures, contact UPMC, contact Sherwood Oaks. Let them know that you're behind us. We really appreciate it.
Well, Shelley, we stand with you here at the Rick Smith Show. Anything we can do to help, let us know. I appreciate the work that you do for our seniors, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll continue providing awesome care.
There you go, Shelley. Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The beauty of our country's present system of government is that anyone is perfectly free to buy a member of Congress. And isn't that what democracy is all about? Take the Koch brothers. Of course, these multi-billionaire industrialists prefer to buy everything in bulk, and they've spent millions of dollars to purchase controlling shares of a whole flock of Republican Congress critters. In fact, they've spent so much on so many elections, from Congress all the way down to small-town school board races, that they've made themselves the poster boys of big money corruption. By huge margins, the public is demanding that Congress terminate the plutocratic infestation of our democratic system by Kochites. How have the brothers responded? By buying another senator. This time, a former senator turned lobbyist. Don Nichols, an Oklahoma Republican, became a powerhouse Washington lobbyist shortly after he left the Senate in 2005. His lobby shop pulls in some $8 million a year to run favor-seeking chores for the likes of AT&T, ExxonMobil, FedEx, General Motors, and Walmart. Now, Nichols is pulling the Koch's plow, using his Capitol Hill contacts to try to defeat reforms that would shut off the funnels of secret, unlimited amounts of corporate cash that the Koch network puts into our elections. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is a perfect example of big money looping full circle to strangle the people's right to be self-governing. The Koch boys write huge checks to candidates and front groups to elect lawmakers who serve their interests. Some of those lawmakers, like Nichols, later slide into lucrative lobbying slots, getting paid a bundle by Koch and Company to fend off Democratic anti-corruption reforms. Thus, the Kochs can keep making bulk purchases of lawmakers, and the circle is drawn ever tighter around democracy's neck. To help pass a constitutional amendment to ban this corrupt money, go to unitedforthepeople.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. The podcast, there at the website. Make sure you get that. Also, get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go. Make sure that it's always in your pocket, always on there for you to take along and to pass along. Make sure all of your coworkers and your friends know about it as well. That's how we expand the program. And that, my friends, is how we begin to change this world. I mean, I listen to stories like Shelley's. I mean, here is a dedicated group of workers who 2 consecutive years. And now this is nothing to take lightly. Perfect scores, perfect inspections by the state, and they come in and they're very, very fastidious, very picky, and to have perfect scores for 2 consecutive years, I think is a big deal, and one that you'd want to actually reward your employees for. One that you'd want to go, hey, great job, thanks. We want to keep you guys because you're doing exactly what we need to have done to make sure that our most vulnerable citizens are taken care of, and as I understand, who are paying big bucks to be taken care of. We want to keep you. But evidently that's not the case. And, it's interesting to me, as she pointed out, they have this high turnover rate where they bring people in, train them, and they move them along. It's interesting to me. And you go through this, and I remember as a kid, and my mother did the nursing home gig for a while, and she would come home, just in tears sometimes, at being overworked and how people were being treated because they didn't have proper staffing, and now granted it was a different time then. Nursing homes were basically warehouses. Really, I mean, it was the end of the warehousing era to where we started talking about how do we have people staying somewhat active. It was basically just people sitting in bed all day long, waiting to die. I don't want to see us go back to that. And as you see the cuts, as you see the cuts to Medicare, or actually to Medicaid, because Medicaid takes a huge part of the Medicaid spending is spent on indigent seniors who stay in nursing homes, a huge part of that. And my fear is that we cut, we cut staffing, we cut funding, we cut all this stuff that we end up right back to those days. to where you have one nurse assistant, one caregiver for 10, 15 people, which I don't know if you realize taking care of 10 or 12 or 15 people is darn near impossible. Making sure that people get up and walk around every day, making sure that people get engagement and have the ability to bathe and to use the restroom without being tied to that bed, and folks that are being turned so they don't get bed sores and being their legs moved so that they don't cramp up. There's so much to this. And I guess I go back to it. Is it our society to where we just don't value the most vulnerable anymore? To where we've almost said, well, used up and discarded, kind of like what we've done to workers in this country. Yeah, we've gotten out of what we want. There's the door. Move on. Seems just twisted to me. And you look at this situation at UPMC where they, look, truth be told, they don't want to have to negotiate. They want to impose. They want to be like all of the other companies who are getting away with this stuff. And they are getting away with it. They've been holding the wheel for so long that they like the power. And they want more of it. Corporate America is drunk with power. And the question is, how do we take that back? How do we change things in the country? How do we change things in the workplace? How do we make sure that our kids don't have to refight the battles of our grandparents? Because sadly, and I've been saying this, my kids are going to have to fight the same battles my grandparents did. It's coming, and people's great-grandparents. And I guess it's part of that fourth turning thing that I've read about. Every fourth generation's got to fight it over again, and be that great generation, to where their kids reap the benefits, and then their grandkids reap the benefits, but start to lose it, and then their great grandkids are screwed and have to do it all over again. And then it just seems to be very cyclic. I'd like to break that. I'd like to make sure that my kids and my grandkids, they don't have to fight these battles over and over again. It just seems to me that at some point we need to, as a society, say enough is enough already. Just a thought. And I fear that we're just not getting the message. And I look at these UPMCs, not too long, we've talked to several over the last couple of years that have followed this same kind of pattern, where the contract ends and they're not negotiating. And then they get to a desperation point, a tipping point, where they're almost forcing the workers to go, we're going to go on strike so that they can replace them. Something wrong. Something seriously, seriously wrong. A little bit of labor history today. The Great Fire of 1910. There was a wildfire that about 3 million acres burned in Washington State, Idaho, and Montana. They say the burn area about the size of Connecticut. If you've ever driven through Connecticut, imagine the wildlife, the forest, the wooded areas. They're just gone, burnt. It's not the most deadly fire, but it is the largest land-based fire in the history of the country. Happened today in 1910. And I guess we've done much better job of maybe fire prevention, maybe cutting fire breaks, maybe that stuff. But like I said, not the deadliest. Also today, the term "going postal" was coined as Crazy Pat Henry Sherrill shot and killed 14 co-workers and wounded 6 others before turning the gun on himself in Edmond, Oklahoma, where in a postal facility that he had worked at. And again, you've got these supervisors who didn't bother paying attention to this guy who clearly had signs of instability. Again, poor management of the workforce. The shooting happened on the day where he was being given reprimanded and given an evaluation for poor work. This shooting it then inspired going postal. I guess not a good day to remember, right? Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. Get the podcast there at the website. Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Looks up to you. Try to make it look easy. Gonna make it look good. Like anybody would. I'm just your average, ordinary, everyday superhero. Trying to save the world, but never really sure.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. SAG-AFTRA, a union that represents broadcast journalists, including many local St. Louis area broadcasters, is condemning the arrests of journalists trying to cover the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. I am a SAG-AFTRA member. My union says it strongly supports the rights of journalists not to be impeded in their efforts to report the news. SAG-AFTRA says journalists have an obligation to report what is happening in their community and in the world. SAG-AFTRA asks that law enforcement in Ferguson permit journalists there the freedom to do their jobs. Half the U.S. Senate wants a one-year moratorium on U.S. Postal Service plans to close mail processing plants and slow down first-class mail delivery. A letter signed by 50 U.S. senators said Congress should block the Postmaster General's proposal to close up to 82 mail processing centers, eliminating 15,000 jobs and slowing down first-class mail delivery. The 50 senators want a key committee to include a one-year ban on mail delivery cuts as part of a must-pass piece of legislation to keep the federal government running into the new fiscal year that starts October 1st. The senators say a one-year moratorium will give Congress time to enact comprehensive postal reforms to keep the Postal Service functioning well into the future. 3 airline unions are opposing a foreign air carrier permit for Norwegian Air International. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, and the Transport Workers Union want the U.S. Department of Transportation to uphold the strong labor protections outlined in the EU-U.S. Air Transport Agreement called Open Skies. The unions, representing 80,000 flight attendants, also say they have safety concerns about Thailand-based cabin crews hired through a system that they say isn't as strong on background checks as the U.S. and European systems. The unions say the permit application from Norwegian Air International undercuts labor standards through evasion of international labor laws and would create unfair competition for airlines that do operate under the Open Skies Agreement. 2,500 Penn State University workers represented by the Teamsters have overwhelmingly ratified a new contract. In a printed statement, John Light, president of Teamsters Local 8, says the new contract provides guaranteed wage increases, keeps health care coverage affordable, and provides more stability for the workers.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned and represented Bank of Labor, member FDIC, equal opportunity lender. The Bank of Labor is the bank of choice for unions and their members. Now you can do business with a bank that shares labor values. More info online at bankoflabor.com.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Claustrophobia, hypochondria, xenophobia rolled up into one. Just stay in your car, stay in mine, and we won't bother anyone. 'Cause I'm afraid of public transportation. Please don't get too close to me. Please don't get too close to me.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So you may remember not too long ago, I guess, because maybe about a year ago, I guess it's been, that in New York City, Mayor Bloomberg at the time was trying some shenanigans with the school bus drivers, again, going after people who make decent wages with decent benefits and trying to change that to people who don't. The same kind of corporatees we've been seeing across the country. And the folks over at ATU were fighting this, and we had talked about it a number of times. It looks like some some good developments are happening, and maybe that's not going to happen. And to me, this is the reason that we get involved politically and, well, elect worker-friendly representatives. But here to talk a little bit about the situation in New York City with the school bus drivers, I've got Larry Hanley. He's the president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU.org, the website. Larry, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello, Rick.
How are you?
Hi, Rick. How are you?
I am good. You know, I look at this, and we had talked about this this New York City bus situation some time ago. I guess about a year and a half now.
Yeah, Rick. It was actually in January of 2013 that this situation exploded in New York. And you know, if you'd like, I can give some background to your listeners.
Now, explain what was Mayor Bloomberg attempting to do?
Well, this was such a devastating attack on working people that even Bloomberg, who is a multi-billionaire corporatist, waited until his very last year in office to spring it. And what he did is he took away an agreement between the city and its contracted school bus workers that had existed since 1979, and even before that, there were prior agreements that covered this. And essentially, the rules protected workers who were contracted by school bus companies, so that if new companies were successful in getting the work from the city, the workers themselves had to keep their jobs and their pay and their pensions. And Bloomberg ripped that out from under our members in New York City in the winter of 2013. And there was a strike that lasted for 5 weeks, and ultimately they starved the workers out. The unfortunate part was that Bloomberg unilaterally had the power to do this, and he did it.
You know, I look at that, and again, you know, what we talk about here on the program is I want companies and I want people competing, but I don't want them competing on who's willing to slit their neighbor's throat for a penny. I want them competing on who does the job the best, on the best design, on higher level competition than I'm willing to work for less than you are. I think that's destructive for our entire society.
Yeah, you know, if you want to be an entrepreneur and go out there and sell a product, it's fine to figure out a better way to make a mousetrap, which is what we're saying. But you can't use, spiraling lower wages to get contracts from municipalities. At least that's not how it should be. You should not jeopardize contracted workers by saying that every 3 years the rug is going to be pulled out from under your employment, from under your wage base, and from under your retirement security.
Yeah, it's insane. So Bloomberg's out, Mayor Bill de Blasio in. Different change of mindset, different change of positioning?
Well, part of what happened when the strike ended is that the various Democratic candidates for mayor, who were all appalled by what Bloomberg was doing, wrote a letter to the local union and said, look, this is not good for the city and its children for you to be on strike. We're urging you to return to work. We understand you may have to weather a storm here with Bloomberg, but if any of us gets elected, we're going to fix this. And Bill de Blasio was one of the candidates who signed that letter, and he has been working with us ever since to try and make good the promise of essentially unscrewing the workforce. And it's been difficult. It's been very complex. But the first step for the mayor to actually change this was to ask the city council to approve a $42 million restoral of funds to the school bus system so that the workers' wages could come back to where they were prior to the Bloomberg attack.
And to me, the message that this sends is that, you know, this is why we need to be electing worker-friendly politicians, mayors, and city council members, dog catchers. Why we need people who are going to at least look at the views of people who put on their work boots and their gloves and go and do the work that needs to be done.
We can't survive without political action, and union leaders and union members and other working people are continually frustrated by people who get elected to office and then do the bidding of corporations and the wealthy. And we have to continually fight to elect people who actually care about working people. And I think, honestly, there are probably people listening to this show giggling, saying, yeah, who cares about working people? It appears that in New York we found a mayor who actually cares enough about working people himself on the line and say we're going to restore the wages of those folks who do this great work for the city.
And those people who may be giggling, do they think that, and I've asked this question a number of times, do they not think that they're working people? I mean, the vast majority of us, and I don't know if you've seen the studies done, the vast majority of us are a paycheck or two away from financial distress, and maybe a handful of paychecks away from standing out on a street corner.
But Rick, so many working people have been screwed by politicians and have seen politicians run for office and then switch their platforms, that it's easy to grow cynical and just assume that, there are no people out there who can actually get elected on promises for the working people in their communities. And every once in a while, you're surprised. And thus far, Bill de Blasio has been a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, one of the things that I talked about earlier in the program, and I don't know if you saw this story, but, in going to Ferguson, Missouri, the guy who's the executive director of the Missouri Republican Party out there, he's the guy named Matt Wills. And I can't believe someone would say this. He was asked about a voter registration drive going on during the daytime in Ferguson, and he said that it's fanning the political flames, and that he says, I think it's not only disgusting, but completely inappropriate. And I find it interesting that, citizens who want to see change in their community and change in the nation, that someone like this would say trying to sign people up to vote is disgusting and inappropriate.
Well, my guess is that people in the Republican Party in Ferguson really don't want to see a change. They're doing quite well with the status quo. But, it's like people who endorse voter suppression by claiming that there's huge, massive voter fraud around the country when it's not true. These are folks who are very happy and comfortable and profiting from the current system, so they don't want to do anything or see anything done that will upset the status quo.
What we hear often is, there's no such thing as class warfare, Larry. There's no class warfare in the country. And I read an article that actually is linked at your site, written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, titled "The Coming Race War Won't Be About Race." And I agree with them. I mean, to me, it's an economic thing. This is a situation where you have entire classes of people who have been left behind.
The saddest thing, if you watch television reports from Ferguson, no matter what channel you choose to watch, or, you can watch Fox or you can watch MSNBC or any other channel, the whole story has been narrowed down to the idea that a white cop shot a black kid. And it is far more deep than that. The problem we have in our society today is we have growing poverty. We have kids that have less and less hope every day. Even if they are successful in getting employed, the jobs are getting worse and paying less, and they're more part-time. And when you drain all the hope out of a community and decide that the way you're going to collect revenue is to issue speeding tickets and red light tickets, and I understand that's half the budget in Ferguson,
right?
You oppress and victimize people, regular citizens, and and then you take a cop and send him in with a gun and say, okay, go enforce the law. And it's the people behind the cop and the people behind the poverty.
I absolutely agree.
In which
Which I guess then takes us back to where we started with the bus drivers and Bloomberg trying to screw workers. To me, it should be about raising the standard of living of all working people, raising the ability of folks to climb out of poverty. And I use myself as an example. Look, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I now live in a neighborhood with doctors and lawyers. Why? Because I worked hard, for one, but for two, I had a union contract. I could have worked hard and made no money like a lot of people do.
That's right. And, what happened to the school bus workers in New York was that they were thrown out of jobs in which they could just about make their rent payments and put into a position where then they had to rely on social services and food stamps and, all kinds of other benefits derived from taxes that should have been paid directly to them as employees with fair wages. Government Government should be a model employer, not a tyrannical employer, and not an employer that forces people into poverty. And that's really part of what's been lost in this era when we elect billionaires like Bloomberg to run our government.
But don't you think a lot of this came, with the Bush mindset that he was going to be the CEO president? I mean, really, we've been going down this path for a while, but I think when Bush took president with that mentality that he's going to be a CEO, he's not going to be the leader of all people. He's going to make the tough choices, which tough choices for them is basically strangling us with the belt that they keep tightening.
Yeah, it's that. It's Bush, it's Ronald Reagan, it's in some ways Bill Clinton and some of the policies he had. I mean, I think in fairness, this has not been a single party problem. This has been a change in the atmosphere in which, America was once a country, and during my lifetime was once a country where we saw this as we're all in this together, and that we cheered people on when they were successful, and not just individually but collectively through their unions. And, what Reagan and then Bush and others taught us is that, you're really all in this alone, that it's every. And people have bought into that, Rick. We have a political climate, even among people who work, who have bought into this hogwash that we're better off if others don't do well, that we measure our success based on other people's failure. And that's something we have to change in this country.
Yeah, I'm with you. I keep asking the question, we have to have an adult conversation about the low-wage economy, that our tax code and the assistance that we give folks seems to be propping up. We've created this low-wage workforce because we're subsidizing it, and then we turn around and we lambaste these folks who need the subsidies to be able to survive because their employment doesn't pay a sustainable wage. At some point, don't we have to have the conversation of models and which is the best model? The subsidy model, or actually earning wages and sharing in the profits that you create?
Yeah, and I think that's the point that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made in his column, where he spoke to the issues that we are seeing. And, this fantasy, this unreality we see on TV, which is just a bunch of talking heads and celebrities who are coming in and trying to figure out, who's more to blame, the rioters or is it the cops? And, that's a false premise. Who's more to blame? Let's take the Koch brothers who are strangling communities, and let's take Governor Walker, who's decided that unions have to be crushed and people can't have pensions and decent wages. Those are the people behind this. It's neither that cop who's just a working guy with a gun, sent in to do a job that's very hard, if not impossible, and a bunch of poor kids who have little hope and end up getting in trouble because of it.
And that's the conversation we haven't seen in our media. So the last question I've got for you: how do we begin to change this? I know you guys at ATU are embarking on an idea of how we train the next generation of activists and people, maybe to begin changing our country. How do we get this out? How do we change that narrative?
Well, from the ATU perspective, we represent bus drivers and mechanics and other transit workers throughout the U.S. and Canada. We're reaching out to our passengers all the time to try and get them engaged with their elected officials to stand up for transit justice. And I think that if in every segment of our society people stand up for justice in the area that they work, I think we can make a change. And that's really the central piece for everybody. We have to be just, and justice means fairness for everybody, not just fairness for myself.
There you go. Larry Hanley, I appreciate you taking time for us. Always great having you on the program.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Hard times are going around, bringing hard luck on New York town. But I'm banking on the AT. Banking on the AT. I'm banking on the AT.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for the world in two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Today is National Aviation Day, but it's a largely somber anniversary. We begin in the United States, where the Federal Aviation Administration said yesterday that they're extending a 3,000-foot no-fly zone around the town of Ferguson, Missouri. It's a decision that's kept news helicopters from doing their work.
There's nothing unsafe about a media helicopter, and in fact, it should help improve accountability.
Greg Leslie is the legal defense director at the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, and he says extending the ban for another week is a cynical move.
When you see something done that broadly, the more suspicious it is. If there was a particular protest going on, they can, and there was a legitimate reason that they needed to have open airspace, that can be an immediate order for a limited time.
According to another FAA decree issued last night, all of Syria's airspace is now off limits to American aircraft. The FAA cited the presence of anti-aircraft weapons among the extremist groups in the country as the primary reason for the flight ban. Speaking of threats to safe travel, when a volcano in Iceland erupted in 2010, ash spread over much of Europe, grounding flights across the continent for more than 6 days. And now there's concern another volcanic event could be imminent, this time at the Bardarbunga volcano. So if you're planning on a transatlantic flight in the near future, watch the forecast. And commercial air travel between Ebola-affected countries in West Africa is suspended indefinitely. A petition created by Air France flight staff is calling for their airline to do the same and stop its service to Guinea and Sierra Leone until the disease can be contained. The petition has received over 700 signatures, but so far Air France doesn't show signs of reconsidering its decision. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the immigration case taken on by lawyer Leon Wiles in 1972 to save a couple from being deported. With a husband required to be deported because of a criminal conviction and a wife who was in a custody battle over her daughter that allegedly had been kidnapped by a former spouse, Attorney Wiles had his work cut out for him. Wiles would have to be persistent and especially creative to get around the deportation for the criminal conviction. His first shot was to contest the definition of cannabis, or more specifically, in this case, cannabis resin. The court apparently did not go along with Wiles' argument about said definition, but Wiles wasn't finished. He came up with another brilliant plan. So join us again next time for Wiles' other argument that would end up establishing a legal doctrine in immigration law that is still with us today. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. Chances are, when you took a shower this morning,
there is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Our quote of the day from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's piece over at Time Magazine. And I highly suggest reading the piece written by the former basketball great, the guy with the sky hook. I loved watching him play. To many Americans, being a person of color is synonymous with being poor. And being poor is synonymous with being a criminal. Ironically, this misconception, this misperception is true even among the poor. And, you know, I've said this for a while, that, you know, we'll lock a guy up for years and years for stealing a candy bar or some cigars. But the real criminals, the ones who live in the good addresses, they never get held to account. How many people did we lock up after the great collapse of 2008? How many banksters went to jail? Can someone give me a number? Yeah, none. Right. None's the number. And what Jabbar talks about is, you know, kind of what we talked about earlier. When the executive director of the Republican Party is saying it's disgusting, and I'm just I just sit here and I shake my head, because what you have is these really, really bizarre folks who we give so much power to. And I look at this guy who's the executive director of the Republican Party there in Missouri, this Matt Wills. A voter registration drive is disgusting and inappropriate in his view. And what I agree with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about is he points out that, you know what? According to the census, there are 50 million people in this country who are poor. 50 million voters, he writes, is a powerful bloc. If they ever got organized in an effort to pursue their common economic goals, he says, so it's crucial that those in the wealthiest 1% keep the poor fractured by distracting them with emotional issues like immigration, abortion, and gun control, so they never stop and wonder how they got so screwed over for so long. I think, again, you know, I think this is a great piece. I think he did a great job writing it, but it's what I've been saying for years on this program. That if you keep people sliced and diced and subcategorized, you can continually screw them forever. Yeah, I've been watching The Sopranos lately. My wife signed up for one of these I don't know. I think it's one of these apps for our smart TV or whatever it is. So I get to watch all of the episodes of The Sopranos for free. So I've been watching a couple of them, and there's the one part where he goes, you know, he's trying to explain to one of his underlings that you don't go and basically take everything someone has. You don't break their arms and legs and kill them to get this $5 back. You keep them you keep squeezing them for as long as you can to get as much out of them as you can. This is the same thing, the same mentality. You keep people divided and like they have an interest. You know, in the black community, the gay marriage thing is huge. With many blacks that I've talked to, you know, it's I wouldn't be one of those. We can't have that, to keep people divided, so that they don't realize how long they've been getting screwed. And to me, you know, out of this Ferguson thing, I'm hoping, you know, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I'm hoping that they wake up and say, you know what? We need to be unifying, and not just poor blacks, poor whites too. It's amazing to me that states like Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas and all of these deep Bible thumping southern poor states, people who don't have health care, people who don't have retirement, people who can barely make ends meet, are voting for the very people who want to make it worse. That's just mind-blowing to me. But I guess when you look at it through the frame of, as long as you keep people divided and pitted against one another, you can control them. Which is why it's not surprising that Mr. Wills says it's disgusting and inappropriate to be registering voters. Seriously wrong. Quick break. Right back.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
We don't want to burn coal. We don't want to breathe coal. And heck, we don't want to export it either.
Well, heck, Oregon cancels proposed coal export facility. July 2014 was the fourth hottest July on record. Fracking industry illegally using diesel, threatening water supplies. Plus,
I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
Republican politicians do accept climate change. They're just too cowardly to admit it.
Ooh, snap. All of those cowards and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
In fact, the black soot spewed by coal rollers is often referred to as Prius repellent. Yeah, baby, Prius repellent. The only other way to keep a Prius away from you is driving over 45 miles per hour.
Oh, Prius slam. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, just to be fair to Priuses, or Prii, we recently bought a really old Prius, 2006, drove from Phoenix to Los Angeles. That's about 6 hours. It required one single tank of gas, and I should add the Prius has just a 10-gallon tank. That's about 45 miles per gallon, and yes, we were able to drive much, much faster than 45 miles per hour. Just wanted to set the record straight there.
Okay, good.
I mean, it's no Tesla. Of course, we'd be happy to talk about Tesla if only they gave us a free one to use. But anyway, I digress. What do you have in today's Green News Report?
Well, first, it's official. July 2014 was the fourth warmest July on record globally, following the world's hottest June on record, and we're now on track for 2014 to be the third hottest year on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Wait, June was the hottest on record globally?
Yep.
July is only the fourth hottest on record globally?
Yep.
The globe is cooling. You're welcome, GOP.
Well, hardly. To top it off, the world's oceans are now at the highest temperature ever recorded and have remained there for the third straight month. But don't expect any action on climate change from Washington anytime soon.
I don't.
We've reported before on Republicans' remarkable flip-flop on climate change since the 2008 presidential campaign.
Yeah, here are some familiar Republican voices from before the 2008 presidential election.
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change.
You're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
The fact is that we have had climate change. Clearly, humans have something to do with it.
That was then. This is now. Here's House Speaker John Boehner again.
Well, listen, I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
Well, now, Bloomberg News reports this week that many Republicans privately say they accept the scientific evidence of human-caused climate change and the need to act, but they are afraid to say so publicly, fearing a backlash from their extremist Tea Party base. Bloomberg interviewed dozens of current and former Republican politicians and lobbyists. They admitted off the record that Republicans won't feel free to speak about climate change until, quote, the Tea Party loses some of its power to influence elections or a severe weather event forces serious discussion of the issue.
Very, very courageous of them.
Trouble in fracking land. 2 new studies add weight to the growing scientific evidence that the controversial drilling technique of fracking is a threat to water supplies. In the first study, researchers at Stanford University found that drillers in Wyoming are fracking for oil and gas at much shallower depths than the industry claims, and that they're even drilling through underground drinking water sources. That directly contradicts industry claims that they are drilling too deep to affect underground aquifers. But wait, there's more. Watchdog group Environmental Integrity Project reviewed the industry's own data and found the fracking industry is flouting federal clean water regulations by illegally using diesel fuel in the toxic chemical fracking cocktail that they inject deep underground, finding at least 350 wells in 12 states were fracked by 33 different companies using diesel fuel without obtaining the required permits.
I thought the use of the fracking fluid was exempt from the Clean Water Act. They would still have to report if they were using diesel fluid in there?
Yes, a specific part of the law allows them to use diesel fuel if they get permission first. It's part of a growing body of evidence against the fracking industry. A recent analysis of fracking in Pennsylvania found that oil and gas drilling has harmed privately owned water supplies over 200 times in just 5 years. But there's some good news. Another proposed coal export terminal bites the dust.
If it's being burned in Asia and China, is it any less polluting to the children of China than it is to the children of America? No. I don't think so.
That was Dr. Andy Harris of Physicians for Social Responsibility at a rally last year to stop a proposed coal export terminal from being built on the Columbia River in order to ship U.S. coal to China. Oregon's Department of State Lands listened, and now they have officially denied a crucial permit for that new proposed coal export terminal, citing the environmental impact that shipping 40 million metric tons of coal a year would have on the region's water, air, fisheries, and the people who live there. That makes 4 of 6 proposed coal export terminals that local tribal nations and grassroots groups have successfully blocked.
Who says there are not victories to be had out there?
Yep.
For much more on all of the victories you may not have heard of, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
And another one gone, and another one gone. Another one bites the dust. Hey, gonna get you too. Another one bites the dust.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So, Mr. I haven't decided if I'm running for president or not, or maybe I'll tell you at the end of the year, or maybe early next year, or maybe I'm running, maybe I'm not. I guess he's making the rounds, traveling from the Garden State into the heartland. Today was in Kansas to meet with Senator Brownback Mountain, also to Oklahoma City to meet with Governor Mary Fallin. Does it kind of make you think that he's actually putting the ducks in the row? Just kind of a thought. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Boston today, not in New York City. I've got Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Luke, how are things in Beantown?
Hey, they're great. I was up here to cover a John McCain and Scott Brown campaign event earlier this week in New Hampshire, and then turned it in just to a little opportunity to stay out of New York for a few days. So I'm happy to be away from the city.
Any chance the carpetbagger is going to win up in New Hampshire?
Boy, it doesn't look like it. I was pretty much focusing my reporting on the event. It was a foreign policy town hall meeting, so I mostly stuck to the two gentlemen's comments related to foreign policy, but I did do a little research into the dynamics of the race, and he is losing to Jeanne Shaheen, the first-term senior senator up there, by about 10%. And since he declared in April, that number hasn't gone down. So, one of the funny optics of the event, as we'd say, was that when things were all finished, presumably I've covered, 500 New Hampshire town halls through the years. Almost every time the candidate will go and do the scrum with reporters. They'll go and shake hands along the rope line.
Yeah, doing the kissing babies thing.
Scott Brown sort of ended the campaign event by saying, "Hey, everyone, sorry, we got to cut it short. We got to get John back to the airport." But then Scott Brown got out of there, and John McCain was left to work the crowd for about 20 minutes answering questions. And he was asked by a reporter, what do you think of the fact that you're sticking around and doing all the heavy lifting while the candidate is gone? And his aide jumped in and said, Scott had a flight. He couldn't stay long, but it sort of contradicted the campaign narrative and reinforced that theme that, Scott Brown had to go back to Boston, and he cut short his New Hampshire town hall. It doesn't get rid of that suspicion, but he's going to lose, I think, for reasons beyond the fact that he's seen as sort of switching allegiances here.
Yeah, if I were the guy, I'd say, you know what, John's old. He can't walk as far as Scott went to get the car. I mean, you don't go. He left this guy here to do what, as you've pointed out, every politician ever in that state has done. And I guess it does reinforce that carpetbagger mentality. But to me, it sends a much different message of how Washington changes people, because the way he won in Massachusetts was the exact opposite of what you just said he did. I mean, Martha Coakley ran probably the worst campaign in the history of campaigning. But he was out in the streets talking to people. So I guess there's part of me that goes, is this how DC changes people?
Yeah, it's a little strange. I was sort of supportive of Scott Brown loosely when he first came onto the scene, and it was because I did see what you just mentioned, that sort of willingness to engage and go out and mingle with people, and a lot of that is still there. But for some reason, I mean, I guess he's not going to. His strengths are not foreign policy, but this was an event modeled around that, and there are a number of issues that he could have talked about that maybe could have highlighted some strengths of him, or he could have brushed up on some answers. I recorded the whole event and then sort of took out the audio of McCain's answers, the audio of Scott Brown's answers, and just sort of put them side by side. Not only did John McCain do more talking, but of the something like 7 questions Scott Brown was asked, only 2 of them were about foreign policy. And in one of them, he was asked about the Boko Haram militants in Central Africa. He said they're sort of a global threat, and he thinks they have something planned for us. I mean, this is wandering off kind of into the wilderness of normal national security thinking when it comes to saying Boko Haram is a direct threat to the U.S. So I thought he just really wasn't as sharp as I was expecting, and I don't see him having the persuasive effect on New Hampshire voters. They don't really have any problems with Jeanne Shaheen. She's not dynamic, really, but I don't see there'd be much of a movement to kick her out of office and put Scott Brown in her place. So, two elections losing to women in a row for Scott Brown, it looks like, between Elizabeth Warren and potentially Jeanne Shaheen in November.
No, he better get the calendar pictures back out. No, because that's just about it. You're about done there. But to me, as you lay out the foreign policy ideas that these folks have, that's the talking point. Everybody's a threat to us. No matter where they are, they're a threat to us, and we've got to deal with. And that seems to be the boilerplate answer.
Yeah, and that's a good transition to the story of the day. At that town hall event, John McCain did a lot of talking about the Islamic State. He did say that and again, this is the headline I went with because it, needs to be remembered. He said he thought the Islamic State was the greatest threat ever faced by the United States. I mean, but don't get me wrong, they're a tremendous destabilizer in the region, and they do have a tremendous regional threat that they're causing, but I don't think he's really in the consensus in the foreign policy sphere by saying that the Islamic State is the greatest threat ever faced by the United States. But what he did call for, and this is now interesting after the death of James Foley went public yesterday, is that he did call for the American military to bring the fight against the Islamic State into Syria. Now, I think we're going to hear this more and more. I'm not so sure the president and the Pentagon are going to go along with it. But the argument being that this is a group that you're trying to fight. They don't respect boundaries. They operate and move freely between Syria and Iraq, and this limiting any sort of military campaign in which they're the target just to Iraqi targets is not really going to work in the long run. But neither the president nor the State Department spokesperson who held briefings today said that's really going to happen in the intermediate future. They said all options are on the table. But up until now, the U.S. has been almost more hesitant than anything to get involved in Syria. And even with public outrage mounting here, I'm not so sure that decision is going to be made.
Yeah, the question then becomes, is Obama doing the right thing? I say yes, keep us the hell out of there.
Yeah, well, it was very interesting. There was some public opinion polling that the Washington Post and ABC News put out just yesterday about this. They said, pretty broadly speaking, Americans approve of the decision to launch airstrikes in Iraq. It was 61% of Republicans said this, 54% for Dems and independents, who I proudly consider myself amongst, 49% approval. So they actually disapproved of the decision to use airstrikes. But there you have a slight majority of the American population behind this strategy, which for a president who struggles at times with public opinion polling is something worthwhile to note. Then the other option, the other military tactic that these Americans who were interviewed were asked was, do you support the United States arming the Peshmerga, the Kurdish military forces in northern Iraq? First off, I don't know how many Americans that you call on the landline phone who don't own mobile phones really know what the Peshmerga are. But they were asked this, and 59% of Republicans said yes. Dems split it, and independents also opposed. So there are two sort of takeaways here that the Washington Post identified, and they're very interesting. The first is that it's one of the first times that the American population seems to be more in favor of direct military action, that is, striking ISIS with American planes, compared to doing indirect support. This is, arming the Kurds. typically it's the other way around. We're more supportive of arming, for example, the Free Syrian Army than we are about bringing the fight to Bashar al-Assad. But things have flipped a little bit when we talk about Iraq. And the other is that despite all this talk that the Republican voter base was becoming more isolationist, that they were, getting the sort of Rand Paul influence, that kind of non-intervention is gaining sway, Republicans are still much more hawkish than Democrats. They're the ones more supportive of going back into Iraq now compared to Democrats. Two kind of interesting takeaways.
For me, I've said for years, the last thing we should be doing is giving people more guns, because then they end up, instead of being turned on other people, kind of towards us. And you can go back through our history and look at all of the groups that we've backed that have turned around and bitten us in the behind. I've never been in favor of going, here's a boatload of military arms.
Well, it's funny, the argument being made by folks like John McCain right now for arming the Kurdish militias is that the enemy they're facing has incredibly heavy firepower, and that's true. But that's because they captured it from Iraqi government, Iraqi military stockpiles, and those weapons were given to them by the United States. So again, we don't need to now go back to the 1970s, to the last century in Afghanistan to find reasons why supplying weapons to certain groups can come around and bite you in the butt. Here we have a very recent example pertaining to the conflict that's in question here. And again, we are seeing now Germany today saying they are going to be giving heavy weapons to the Kurds. Great Britain, Italy, and France have also signed up for that, and the U.S. as well. So this strategy is being pursued, even though in the not-so-distant past, you have an example of giving weapons to groups in Iraq not really working out in the long run.
Yeah, I got a question. How much of that is economic, though? We're producing all of these goods, and we need to keep our people working and producing this stuff. Going here, cause some chaos in the sand.
Well, it's an interesting argument. Certainly, given the fact that Great Britain and France, most specifically, have been hit with the European Union sanctions on prohibiting exports of military equipment to Russia. I know for some of those countries, like Great Britain, it's not a big hit. France, though, derives a lot of money from its military arms trade with Russia. So, potentially there is that dynamic there. I haven't seen that talked about, but perhaps it should be.
And I guess there's the other argument is the same argument that I've made about we should have left Saddam Hussein in place. Not that I think he was a great guy, but that he kept order on a certain level, and you kept people pitted against one another, and maybe they had their skirmishes, and maybe they didn't, but they weren't generally coming after us.
Yep, that's it's a shoulda, coulda, woulda kind of approach. I've definitely heard that argument, and I don't have too much to add. I think at this point people are resigned to the reality we've got, but it is an interesting thing to turn over.
So what else is going on today? I understand that this video of this reporter has been deemed authentic. Tell me what's going on there.
Well, yes, the video has been deemed authentic. There was some, talk about whether or not it was real last night. I think the major questions are still where it was shot and when it was shot. The head CEO of the Global Post, who is, it turns out, a family friend of mine, was on Fox just a few minutes ago talking about the efforts that his organization had channeled towards trying to free James Foley over the past few years. He said they've spent millions of dollars trying to rescue him. They've been working with private intelligence and security firms to try to ascertain information about them. And he said they were actually relatively certain where he was being held. And he said it would have been very surprising to him if the U.S. did not know at this point exactly where they're being held. He didn't imply that he'd shared all that info with the U.S. government, but I'm sure it did happen. So we have questions now about, there are reports of at least 20 other journalists, including 4 Americans, being held by opposition groups in Syria. It could be the government. It could be groups like the Islamic State. But they're out there, and you just think the kind of chaos and anger that has been unleashed by the publication of that video yesterday and the calls for American military action that have gone out as a result of that video being published. And you think to yourself, man, if they have 20 more people that they could, God forbid, put out in front of the camera, threaten with execution or execute, what kind of change could they force in thinking around the world? It's oftentimes the most angry populations that force their governments into making sort of brash decisions. And I think there's a concern about the real propaganda value that ISIS is in possession of. This is not the same as Al-Qaeda filming a speech by Osama bin Laden, putting it on a VHS, and then shipping it to Al Jazeera headquarters and relying on them to publish it. They can cut the media organizations right out of this, and they can upload a video to YouTube directly. They have a network of people using social media who can get this footage and these terrorist threats right into the screens and homes of Americans. You don't need the intermediaries, and I think Washington would be right to be concerned about how far they are going to be driven to act based on public opinion, given the propaganda value of these videos.
You know, I remember, and I'm not sure when it was. It's been a couple of years. I think 2004. That Nicholas Berg, if you remember that video, it's still on the internet. You can see that you've got these masked thugs behind him, and they actually beheaded him on camera, and you can actually see it on the internet. I can't imagine 20 more of those.
Yeah, I mean, again, I hope everything possible is done to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
But it's it's an interesting point that some analysts have raised, that it could be in the agenda of the Islamic State to try to push the United States and whatever coalition we could cobble together into a broader engagement in Syria. It's not like they're really being authentic when they say the reason we're killing James Foley is because you're attacking us in Iraq. They may be looking to provoke a bigger fight, because it's these kind of groups, more often than not, that thrive when there is a war. When there's no war, as one commentator I was reading said on his blog recently, that when there is a war, these groups become states. When there's no war, a terrorist organization is just a radical bunch of people within a country. So in some ways, there could be arguments to be made that they actually want to see the American public demand military action in Syria on the part of the United States. And that's something I'm sure is being talked about in Washington as they develop a strategy here.
Yeah, all tough stuff. And lastly, what's going on with the Ebola outbreak?
God, you're not ending on the good story here. Well, I suppose I'll leave with the bad news.
Is there a good story in your world?
Nah, but I scanned the list of topics that I sent you. I didn't really include one. But I'll finish very quickly on North Korea, because that is funny. But briefly, we learned in Liberia today that the military has been activated to quarantine a major slum. This is a problem, not least because the military and the government are pretty unpopular in the capital, Monrovia. So there's already suspicion and fear, rather, that this could lead to some pretty widespread civic unrest, with people basically being forced to stay in a slum that does have Ebola-affected people in it. We'll see how that pans out, though Nigeria and Guinea are reported to have made significant progress in getting a grip on this disease. So bad and good headlines intermix. And then on North Korea, I just thought this was funny. They don't ever really want to sit on the sidelines of public, global public attention. And they issued some pretty interesting statements earlier today. It was almost like a warm-up for some sort of sketch comedy show where you had to bring in 5 funny insults for all these world leaders, and they trotted some of them out there. The highlight for me were the words they reserved for Secretary of State John Kerry. They called him a wolf donning the mask of a sheep. Now, that's not the interesting part. That language you can hear from Israeli politicians from all over the place. But then they made an aesthetic comment pointing out what many of us have noticed over the last few years, which is the strange evolutions of John Kerry's face, presumably from some sort of plastic surgery attempt decades ago. They called him, they said he had a hideous lantern jaw. I don't really understand what they mean by that, but they're painting a pretty vivid imagery in their North Korean propagandic language.
I don't know where to go with that, Luke. I just find it sadly comical.
Just a lantern jaw. I went to school for poetry writing, and I would never have pulled that one out of my hat.
There's another place you could pull it out, but we won't say. Luke, always great talk with you. I appreciate the update and the news. Thanks so much.
Sure thing. Take care.
Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
The beauty of our country's present system of government is that anyone is perfectly free to buy a member of Congress. And isn't that what democracy is all about? Take the Koch brothers. Of course, these multi-billionaire industrialists prefer to buy everything in bulk, and they've spent millions of dollars to purchase controlling shares of a whole flock of Republican Congress critters. In fact, they've spent so much on so many elections, from Congress all the way down to small-town school board races, that they've made themselves the poster boys of big-money corruption. By huge margins, the public is demanding that Congress terminate the plutocratic infestation of our democratic system by Kochites. How have the brothers responded? By buying another senator. This time, a former senator turned lobbyist. Don Nichols, an Oklahoma Republican, became a powerhouse Washington lobbyist shortly after he left the Senate in 2005. His lobby shop pulls in some $8 million a year to run favor-seeking chores for the likes of AT&T, ExxonMobil, FedEx, General Motors, and Walmart. Now, Nichols is pulling the Koch's plow, using his Capitol Hill contacts to try to defeat reforms that would shut off the funnels of secret, unlimited amounts of corporate cash that the Koch network puts into our elections. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is a perfect example of big money looping full circle to strangle the people's right to be self-governing. The Koch boys write huge checks to candidates and front groups to elect lawmakers who serve their interests. Some of those lawmakers, like Nichols, later slide into lucrative lobbying slots, getting paid a bundle by Koch and Company to fend off Democratic anti-corruption reforms. Thus, the Kochs can keep making bulk purchases of lawmakers, and the circle is drawn ever tighter around democracy's neck. To help pass a constitutional amendment to ban this corrupt money, go to unitedforthepeople.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but know they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can always email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, the podcast's there at the website, or you can listen on your smartphone 24 hours a day. Just get the Rick Smith Show app. Interesting story out of Ferguson, Missouri. Yeah, again, everybody looking for the story. Everybody looking for the latest, the headline grabber. CNN's iReport. They evidently the guy who's this Ron Johnson, who's been sent in to kind of save the day in Ferguson. This captain with the Missouri Highway Patrol. Somebody said that he was making gang signs, and you go, is that kind of racist just to think about it? But the claim is he was making a gang sign when somebody took a picture of him. What they're saying actually is he was making signs of his fraternity. Now this isn't during the what's going on now. This is in the past. They evidently said they found photos of this guy making hand gestures that they claimed were gang signs. When they're saying that it's this Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity that they have secret signals. Yeah. I guess just looking for the story. A black guy doing peace signs and stuff. It's got to be gang related, right? Just nuts. Anyway, I'm going to be taking the next 2 days off. I've got hip problems that I got to have looked at. I'm going to do some stuff that I'm not thrilled at having to do. So for the next 2 days, we're going to be running best of here at the program while I get this hip problem evaluated, under control, whatever words you want to use. Part of getting older and falling apart, part of an old work injury. It's one of those things. So for the next couple of days, I'm going to be in therapy and in all kinds of stuff that I don't look forward to. I'd rather be sitting here, but got to do what we got to do. I hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll see you back here on Monday. Thanks so much for listening.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's covered like time flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.